Hey, my name is Elijah, and I'm a 25-year-old college kid. Around my campus, and especially in the tech class I take, I've been hearing about something called the dark web. I got super into it for a bit and learned a lot about it, but eventually lost interest. Anyways, fast forward a month, and this is where the story begins. So I was browsing the internet, and I was on some random old website, and there was a link. The title of the link was "Ignore This." Whenever I looked at it, it didn't end in a .com or a .org. It ended in something called a .onion. Back when I was into the deep web and dark web, I read up about it, and I found out that .onion is what most of the sites on the dark web has. I of course got super curious and accidentally clicked it. It sent me to a random group chat in some random chat room, and it looked like it was from the 1990s. I thought it was a dead website. Then, randomly, something popped up asking me to make a username and password, and then it asked me for a code. I had no idea what the code was, so I was about to X out when I see a box. It says, "Didn't I say not to click?" I was horrified for some reason. I know, it doesn't sound really scary, but to me at the time, it was horrifying. The next day, I got an email reading the following: "When I tell you not to click something, don't click it." And then, the next day, I was getting out of bed and there was a knock at my door. After yelling at my dogs to shut up, I opened the door. There was a box outside the hall of my dorm. It was someone I knew named Fred. At least, it had his full name on the box. It was a medium-sized box with no return address. When I opened it, there was a lot of packing foam. Then, I saw it. As soon as I saw it, I dropped the box. It was a human hand. I was terrified. Too scared to tell anyone except for a few friends. They didn't take it seriously. A lot more suspicious activities then started happening around me in my college campus. 1. There had been chocolate placed all around the backyard of my dorms, that is where I take my dogs out to do their business. And he ate a piece of the chocolate, which also had rat poison in it, and almost died. Also, a lot of my friends got pissed at me and kept saying I was sending them, quote, inappropriate messages on Facebook. And I hadn't logged into Facebook in like a week because my phone broke when a drunk guy at a frat party sat on it. I also got a note in my mailbox, and my roommate opened it, and it was a threat telling me to put my PC by the back of the college library. I have no idea what the point of all this was, or if it was a prank, or if that website had something to do with it. I'll keep everyone updated if I find out more stuff. Update. So the police had been notified after I was sent a threatening email demanding $30,000 for not doing what I was told to. They said they were gonna do all these terrifying things to me. I'm horrified right now. I'll update everybody on Monday. Monday. Okay, so we now know one thing. Whoever is doing this is from the same school I go to, but might be working for a bigger company worldwide from the dark side of the internet or something. We think they scare people into handing over expensive properties, then just straight up threaten them if they don't do it. The police said I should stay in a hotel for now, and they will have more information by the end of the week, so I'll update then. Saturday. I just heard back from the cop I was talking to earlier. She said that they put an IP tracker on the link, and it was sent somewhere in New Jersey. But then, they tried again, and it was sent to the city my college was in. They tested it a few more times, and it went from my city to New Jersey over and over again. They even hired some big shot hacker to check. They said the IP was in my city. They're now keeping an eye on suspicious searches from around the campus. I also got a note in the mail saying that if I drop the investigation, I won't make any of the quote higher-ups angry, and I'll be let go from their little operation. I was a little worried by what they meant by higher-ups. I told one of the detectives about it, and they told me not to worry and to go take a vacation. I currently can't afford to right now. I work graveyard shifts at Burger King, and my scummy drug-dealing dorm mate just got expelled from the school, so he can't help me. I seriously have no idea what to do, so all I can do now is wait. Update. 2 weeks later. Okay, so I was aided by someone on WhatsApp named please open 63465, and they sent me a message of my Burger King I work at. I didn't reply, but I told one of my bosses what was happening, and he let me take off for a whole week, and then I get paid for it too. Anyways, later that night, that account sent me a picture of a man in a ski mask holding a weapon, and sent a message saying, "Why didn't you come to work today?" And my boss also told me they got 8 threatening phone calls after she wouldn't tell Swan if I was working that night, and over the phone, they admitted they did have a gun. I'm super horrified and just recently moved out of my dorms. I live in a really shitty 50-unit apartment on a terrible side of town. I deleted all my social media and only got Facebook back. I'm using a fake name and a new email. I now work at a 7-Eleven down the street from my apartment. I don't know if I will log in to update this, but if I do, there'll be big news. The police told me they have a suspect, and I'm really excited to move back into my dorms. I hate this new apartment. It smells like cigarettes, piss, and booze. Don't get me started with the neighbors. I had to drag this passed out drunk guy back to his room 2 times already, and I've only been here for a week. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. I'll see you in the next post. 10 months later. Damn, I'm sorry. I've been really busy lately and forgot to update this, but we got everything worked out. The police found out who the hacker was. There was 3 of them. One was a 20-year-old who lived in a super rich part of town, who was the one sending me the messages. There was another one that lived kinda by my old apartment. I'm back in my old dorm, by the way, with a new, much better roommate than my last. And the last guy was some random nobody from way out in the county of my city. They were all taken in for threatening me and other people who fell for their trap over the internet. But I think one also was found with a bunch of drugs and got like 2 years. The other 2 just got 7 months. I hope they have to stay off the internet when they are released or something like that, because my anxiety is through the roof. Anyways, thanks for reading my story. This happened to me senior year of high school. All my friends were talking about something called the deep web. They were really interested because one of them bought some drugs off a website on it. Now, I heard of it a bit, but only in those horrifying YouTube stories where usually the person reading says, "Don't get on the deep web." But I gotta admit, I was interested as hell. So, one of my mates, we'll call John, told me that he would have us all over to his apartment and he'd show us how to use it and just go through some sites and whatnot. I was really excited. Not really to buy anything, but rather morbid curiosity. Before I went to my friend John's house that night, I did a little more research, seeing what all was on it. I was amazed. Alien and monster sightings, government secrets, guns, and even hitman services. I was most interested in looking into the alien and monster sightings. As I was getting into my car, my friend who was also going gave me a ring. He told me not to go tonight, and that he was terrified. I kept asking him what happened, and all he says is, "I saw some messed up shit, Ryan. Do not fall for the rabbit hole." And then he hangs up. That's weird, because he was the one who ordered the stuff from it, and he was all excited about it whenever we were in school. I'm a little more hesitant now, as I'm driving through the city I live in. I'm just trying to think of what Ryan meant by rabbit hole. I get there to John's apartment, and get into the elevator and press the button to go to floor 9. As the old elevator is slowly going up, I text Ryan. "I'm so sorry. They're gonna come for me. I thought they were lying. It's too late. Forgive me." I ignore it. He must be trying to scare me, or is being a wuss and doesn't want me to go on it. At least I thought. I get to John's apartment, and he already is installing something to his laptop. "What the hell are you doing?" I say. John looks back and replies, "I'm installing this thing someone told me I should. It should keep us safe. Also, there's beer in the mini fridge." As I go to the mini fridge, I hear my phone ding. Ryan is typing. I then put my phone on mute, so now Ryan can't bother me anymore. We start searching through the dark web. We go on lots of sites selling body parts, weapons, drugs, and we just check it all out. We knew most of it was fake or a scam. That was until it happened. A link popped up right in the middle of the screen, and For some reason, we just clicked it. And I'll be honest, I was a little worried at first. When we clicked it, it took 2 whole minutes to load up. And it was me and John. And there was a price tag under the picture of us. I bought myself off the dark web. It took me months of working at a shitty Burger King, 15-hour shifts. It was work, sleep, get up, work again. And it went on for months. I got super paranoid that someone would buy me. Once I had $23,000, the website said I needed. I called John and quit my job at Burger King on the spot. Whenever I called him, he said he went to the link again, and in big red letters, it said, sold. I started doing it on a whim. My brother has an unhealthy obsession with online vloggers. I can barely go one day without him linking me to a video of someone taking part in some sort of challenge, or performing some sort of social experiment. So, when the whole deep web mystery box trend started, I was one of the first to know. My brother must have sent me dozens of videos of annoying preteens opening up boxes filled with junk that they tried to pass off as creepy or sinister. When my brother asked me for my opinion, I told him that it combined all the boredom of unboxing videos with all the stupidity of the Tide Pod challenge. I added that most of them were probably making the boxes up themselves. Even I could do it. That's when the wheels started turning. A quick search confirmed that this was a growing trend, with hundreds of people claiming that they've opened up boxes containing something from drugs to murder weapons to mysterious flash drives. Some vloggers even claimed that they had spent thousands of dollars on a single mystery box. Those were obviously fake, but what about the rest? Were there really people out there that would spend at least $100 on a chance to go viral? I bet that they would, and unfortunately, I was right. Putting the boxes together was easier than expected. I had some cardboard boxes stuffed into my closet that turned out to be the perfect size for the job. Some rusty screwdrivers proved perfect as my murder weapons. My desk drawer offered a surprising number of old flash drives I had. I began to put weird and creepy images on it. Then I began filling up every mystery box with as many creepy videos and creepy objects I could find. Finally, some expired sinus tablets provided me with some mysterious deep web drugs once I'd peel the labels off. Getting the website set up on the deep web was a little harder, but you can find an online tutorial for anything these days. By the time I was ready for bed, I was the proud owner of Emporium of Mysteries. For $50 worth of Bitcoin, anyone could be the proud owner of a mystery box. Sure, the site looked like it had come straight out the 90s, but it was good enough. I was in business. The next morning, I went looking for customers. Fortunately, my brother's message made me even more familiar with the online vlogging community. I messaged a few of the smaller channels with some burner accounts. I made and left a few comments on their latest videos too. You should do a deep web unboxing video. You know what would be really cool? Unboxing something from the deep web. I bet you get millions of views. I heard about this new place on the deep web called Emporium of Mysteries. They sell mystery boxes there. You should check them out. Then, all I had to do was sit back and wait. By the end of the day, I had 6 purchases. Not much all put together, but enough to help put food on the table. By the end of that afternoon, I had the boxes ready to ship. I wasn't looking to scam people after all. They got to make stupid videos, and I got to eat. Everybody was happy. I sold a few more over the next few weeks, but eventually interest died down. Life went on. My brother sent me more stupid videos, and I gradually forgot about my time as a deep web merchant. Until last Friday, when I got home from work, there was a package waiting for me outside my apartment door. When I picked it up and examined it, I realized it was one of my mystery boxes. It looked like it had an unhappy customer, but it wasn't like they were going to get their money back. I took it inside and opened it up. It was empty, save for a flash drive that I didn't recognize. I was curious what was on it, but I wasn't about to let some weird hacker infect my computer, so I dug out an old laptop that I hardly use anymore and plugged it in. It was full of pictures of my hometown, my apartment, and of me. Whoever sent me this had been following me around and had been inside my house. Staring at those pictures, I started to realize how out of depth I was. You see, not everything you can find on the deep web is fake. There's some people out there who sell real mystery boxes, and they're tired of scammers like me taking away their profits. Thankfully, they're very generous people and wanted to give me a second chance. So I'm pleased to announce that Emporium of Mysteries is under new management. Now, for the same low price, you will receive a genuinely cool mystery box. It will include a special tool from my new partner's personal collection, along with a video instructing you on how to use it, co-starring myself. The body part or organ extracted during the video will also be included with a special memento. Supplies are limited, so search us out on the deep web as soon as possible. We look forward to your business. I've never told this story to anyone other than my closest friends, but this felt like a good outlet to finally get it out of my chest publicly. There's something called the 6 degrees of separation theory, which basically states that everyone in the world is separated by at most 6 steps. Well, I'm separated from Trent Reznor, 9 Inch Nails mastermind, by just 1 step, and it is due to a stalker. Back in 2006, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, and I had just joined a pretty particular punk band, which mixed a very loud sound with carpet-like visuals. We never made it big, but our act was appealing enough to get us some attention of many people. We were kind of local celebrities, but one of them was a strange girl. She was always chain-smoking and had a weird aura to herself, and who was always wearing a jacket on her shoulders, meaning her arms were not in the sleeves. And she eventually said she wanted to be our manager. She said she was friends with Slash from Guns N' Roses, that she'd had managed a couple of bands when she used to live in New Orleans and whatnot, so we decided to hear her out. Our band was sort of a crazy one, so drugs passed out freely at our parties. This girl, she told us her name was Christine something, would provide us party favors sometimes. She would tell us that she's worth $2 million, that she had 5 cars and worked in luxury buildings, and that she had a huge house somewhere in the suburbs. Thing is, she was always picking cigarette butts off from the street and smoking the filters, like she was a homeless person. Something about her just didn't click particularly with me. She would come to see us in a sort of fancy SUV, so we went along with her stories for the most part. Eventually, Chrissy fell hard for me. She told me she was divorcing her husband and wanted to be with me. I was intrigued by her, so I started testing all her stories. I asked to visit her at her office, and she would always make up excuses as why I couldn't, until eventually, she told me her office had been closed down, and that they were looking for new space. I asked her why she keeps using the same car, even though she has 5, and again, excuses and more excuses. I asked to visit her at her huge house, and the same thing. She would come up with weird reasons on why I couldn't visit, mostly that her husband is still there and whatnot. I started to get sick of all her excuses and eventually confronted her that I thought she was being a big fat liar. She got so desperate, started to make up more excuses, and I just told her to get lost. She had a previous fight with some of my bandmates before. We weren't going to have her as a manager or anything. A day after I dropped her, the calling started. She started calling me every day asking to see me. I would constantly tell her no, until one day she showed up at my house around 5 a.m., apparently wasted. She said she'd picked up this guy friend of hers to go to a party, but that he was too drunk, and that he was now passed out in her car, and she didn't know what to do with him. I looked across the street and saw no one in her car, and she said it was because the guy was laying down. I didn't really feel like bothering and going to check the car out. She eventually started crying, and I felt bad enough for her that I let her come inside to my living room. It was at this point she took off her jacket, and for the first time ever, I realized she was missing her entire left arm. I was already weirded out by her showing up at my house drunk and all, so I didn't dare asking what happened that time. I know this has nothing to do with the story, but it's just something that just added to the already weirded out atmosphere. I hung out with her for a while. At this point, I started doubting that she was actually drunk. I gave her coffee, I told her to please never show up to my house like that again, and eventually told her to drop the guy off at a Waffle House, and then just to go home. It might not have been the most responsible thing to tell someone in that state to drive, but I just wanted the whole thing to be over. And like I said, I felt that she was just acting drunk the whole time, and she seemed okay enough to drive. She eventually left, and that was that for the night. Next day, again, she started stalking me by phone, to the point I just stopped picking up. I worked early hours, and she would call me at 2 or 3 a.m., completely drunk. I eventually got sick of it all, and told her to stay away from me, and to never call me again. She complied, and for about a week, it seemed like the whole thing was history. Around 6 days later, she calls me again, when I was at work. I started telling her that she wasn't supposed to call me, but she said she could finally invite me to her house, and that she wanted me to come visit her. All sorts of red flags went up for me, so of course I tell her to forget about it, and just hung up on her. She again started calling me at late hours, to the point I had to turn off my phone at night. Otherwise, I would never get a good night's sleep. I finally remember it was a Friday. After waking up, I had a voicemail on my phone, left it around 2 a.m. I checked it out, and it was her saying, "Hi Max, I just took 200 pills, and I've been drinking all night. I just wanted to say goodbye, and that I love you. Good luck with the rest of your life." Needless to say, I got totally weirded out. I was so sick of her lies, I just deleted the message, completely assuming it to be one of her ploys to get me to call her. I decided to forget about it and went to work. Next Tuesday, I get another voicemail from her phone, but this time it's a guy's voice. "Hi Max, it's Christy's husband. I'm calling her friends in her contact list to let them know she passed away last Friday, and we're doing a memorial for her in downtown Atlanta tomorrow. If you want to go, please call me back so I can give you the address." I can't even explain how I felt at that point. I was shocked, and I tried to invade the news by thinking that this was some guy that Chrissy manipulated into calling me just to get me somewhere at some time. But of course, the whole situation didn't make much sense to me. The guy eventually called another of my bandmates, whose name was in Christie's contact list as well. I told my band about this entire situation, so my bandmate, who had been suspicious of the girl for a while, started prying the guy for more info. We eventually learned that she used a fake name with us the whole time, and she'd been using a made-up name because she had been in trouble with the law. We googled her, and sure enough, it turns out she had stalked Trent Reznor in the past, and even managed to steal his credit card information. She even was arrested for it. I was stunned at this point, unsure of what to do next. We never made it to the memorial. We were way too suspicious to do it. To this day, I still don't know if the girl committed suicide for real, or if the whole thing was just a sham to get me into some trouble. But since I never heard from her again, I doubt it. Or maybe she's been using a fake name ever since, and decided to move on with her life. I'll never know, but it's definitely the worst way to get one degree of separation with someone famous. I got rid of my cell phone after that, and it took me 3 years until I felt okay to get a new one. I never wanted to go through something like that ever again. This little story is about a creep who thought he had all the power in the world, a creep who probably had a horrific childhood, but a creep nonetheless. Anyway, I befriended this creep online back in 2011, Facebook of course. We had mutual friends I trusted, so I assumed he was a cool guy. Well, that's a terrible assumption to make whether they're mutual friends or not, but I was a naive 18-year-old girl. His name was Danny. I thought he was a cool guy at first. He had an awesome taste in music and shared a lot of great songs with me. He was also incredibly, inappropriately hilarious. He was full of jokes and bizarre stories. I soon grew to love talking to him. He never asked if I had a boyfriend. I assumed he knew that I did. After all, we were Facebook friends now, and there were pictures of my boyfriend everywhere. And it's not like I kept my relationship status hidden. It was right there for all to see, but I guess he didn't know. One day in October, he decided to tell me how much he felt about me. He recited a poem he'd written, comparing me to a beautifully and elegantly handcrafted tapestry. Keep in mind, I've never even met this guy, and we'd only been talking for a month or so. I responded with something along the lines of, "Wow, I wish my boyfriend said stuff like that." He got angry, super angry. He asked me how I could have let him on like this. He asked me how I could do this to him. He told me he had opened his heart to me. He begged and pleaded and supposedly cried. I was beyond puzzled. I decided to give him some space, and it worked for a few days, but he eventually messaged me again. He may have apologized, but I honestly can't remember that exact conversation. I do know that things returned to normal. He became silly and fun again. At this point, I had his Skype, and he had mine. I would talk to him there sometimes, but I'd never use the camera. I didn't feel comfortable with it. Actually, I hated using the camera with anyone. I told him that when he started to beg me to use it, but he didn't relent. Still, I kept making excuses. Danny wasn't having it. Then, he got even more aggressive, and then started getting weird. He randomly told me to Skype with him naked. Time after time I told him no. Eventually, I blocked him on Skype, but ended up receiving dozens of angry messages on AIM. I don't exactly remember what he said, though I do have screenshots of the chat on a hard drive somewhere. I remember it being hateful and absolutely insane, and there was some stuff about me being a really awful friend as well. Before long, he told me he was a very excellent hacker. He told me he had a whole slew of hacker friends as well. He told me he could change my college grades and make me fail. He told me he would make my life a living hell. I didn't necessarily believe it all, but I did believe he would do something. Despite these negative confrontations, we still had periods of silliness. During these periods, things were normal. I felt safe, well, to an extent. I tried to keep him happy. I wanted to stay on his good side, because I did believe he would attempt to tarnish my reputation otherwise. Before long, he started giving me ultimatums. Either you get on Skype with me, or things will get very bad for you. I can tell your boyfriend you're cheating on him. I eventually asked our mutual friends about him. They said he was violent, dangerous, and twisted. Even better, he lived mere minutes away from the college I attended in Reading, Pennsylvania. Every day, I started to get more panicked about going to school. While on campus, I'd look around for guys that looked like him, guys with long red hair and beards, and I'd be wary of anyone who even slightly resembled him. At this point, I was honestly convinced he'd just show up and try to find me. I blocked him on AIM, and I made a new Skype. I knew this would infuriate him, and it did. I received another batch of messages on Facebook about how I needed to learn to treat people better. I told him I was uncomfortable with what he was asking of me. He responded with something along the lines of, "Fine, you choose in your fate." I blocked him on Facebook. I'd had enough of him terrorizing me, but I should have known it wouldn't be the last time I'd hear from him. At the end of November, I received 3 Facebook messages from someone named Adam, whoever he was. He just joined Facebook a couple weeks ago, and he had no friends or content. The message read, November 27th, 2007. You've been warned repeatedly, and you are now being served notice. November 29, 2011. I believe this is your last warning, and then you have been informed of your behavioral issues. The situation will change before the start of next weekend, or action will be taken. November 30, 2011. So you attend college, right? And your grades are passing? Not for long. You are warned on how to treat him and how you are to act. You've got until this week's end to correct this behavior, or your life becomes a very difficult thing. You should never treat someone who has a life like his the way you do. To this day, I'm not sure who Adam was. It could have been Danny, or it could have been one of his low-life hacker friends. Either way, I was terrified at the time. Against my better judgment, I unblocked Danny on Facebook. By now, my boyfriend was aware of the situation. He suggested that I contact police if things got any worse. Maybe I should have, but Danny hadn't officially done anything to me. So, what could they do? Still, I took screenshots of all his screen names. I saved our chat logs in AIM. I took screenshots of all his threatening messages. I saved it all to a folder, just in case I needed evidence. Danny's nonsense continued right through Christmas. Some days, he'd be sweet and funny. Others, he was back to being angry and pressuring. I promised him a Skype session to calm him down, but I kept using my schoolwork as an excuse to delay it. Shortly after Christmas, I blocked him again on all accounts. I just decided to deal with whatever he does. If I did end up getting hacked, at least I had the evidence, right? A couple of weeks went by and nothing happened. Then I received a Facebook message from another account I didn't recognize. I don't remember this one, but I remember the message. After careful consideration, you're being let go. You may want to do the respectful thing and thank the one who you have wronged. It is thanks to his compassion that you are being forgiven so easily. I blocked the account immediately. In January of 2012, something magical happened. I woke up one morning to see the news that Danny has been arrested, and so have a bunch of his creepy hacker friends. They were all involved with it as well. I'm not going to explain what happened for privacy reasons. In 2013, Danny was indicted. He's looking at up to 60 years, which will make him almost 90 when he gets out. Even if he's released early, he'll be supervised for the rest of his life. I'm not sure I'm allowed to post a link to the news story, but it's online. I guess being a monster creep catches up with you eventually. When I was in college, almost a couple of decades ago, I got really sick, and I went to the school's health clinic. I was super out of it, and they sent me to the emergency room. After a bit of time passed, it could have been even just a week, I don't remember how long, I was in the cafeteria with my husband. This guy approached us and introduced himself to me, telling me that he was the person who gave me his seat at the clinic. I didn't recognize him at all, but okay, fine. A thank you was in order. He said I was pretty messed up that day and asked how I was doing now. After that, he kept going over to me all over the campus, and each time he would remind me that he was the guy who gave me his seat. One day, I received a message on a social media type site that no one today has heard of. I didn't have identifying info on the site, but I'm sure I had pics of me. The message was from the guy who given me a seat. He wanted to chat with me on AIM. I have no clue how he found me on that site, because it was a very small site. We talked on AIM, and it turned out he knew a lot about me, and he'd been following me for some time. 2 years before he gave me a seat at the clinic, he told his friends he was going to date me. Yes, 2 years beforehand. He'd admitted to this for some reason. He was in a serious relationship, so I have no clue why he was talking to me. Fast forward several years, and he found me on Facebook and added me. I didn't accept the request, so he then friended my friends on there, and whenever I commented on one of their posts, he would comment too. I ended up blocking him. It has been several years since, and luckily I haven't heard of him since, and I hope I don't. My boyfriend is in a band, and my sister and I always go to the gigs. He lives in a small city outside a larger city that he always plays in, and we're heading to his house after one of the gigs. My sister and I decided it would be funny to buy him a card, like a child's birthday card, to give to him to celebrate his first gig of the year. So we decide to go to Walmart. As soon as we get inside, we are followed by two men. Both are in their mid to late 20s. My sister and I are 18 and 20. I've been followed in places before, and it's always an uncomfortable experience, so we try to lose them. We eventually do, after fast walking through random aisles for 10 minutes. We buy the card and some snacks and head back out to the car. We leave and we start driving for a bit. That's when we notice a car that's been following us for a while, and when my sister looks in, she tells me that she thinks it's the two guys from the store. At this point, I notice, and it is them, and I'm really freaking out. My boyfriend's house is not on a busy road, so we know they're not just happening to go the same way as us. I call my boyfriend up about halfway to his house. The two guys are following us very closely still. I explain to him what's happening, so he comes outside and waits for us on his porch. We pull into his driveway and stay in the car for a minute. The two guys drive by really slowly, then speed down the street. My sister and I go inside, really shaken up. We notice for the next half hour or so, the guys drive by several times, each time really slowly. We lock the doors and windows and pull all the blinds, and that night we even slept in the living room. So, creepy Walmart guys who decide to follow us home, let's not meet again. I originally posted this story to r/creepyencounters, but I heard it was a good fit to post here too, so here it goes. Ever since I was 14 years old, I've been scared of lightning. It started when I was out on a soccer field during a thunderstorm, and lightning struck the fence, just over 100 feet away from me. The sound was deafening, and I can still remember the awful sensation of the sound vibrating through my whole body, but this wouldn't be the only incident involving a lightning strike that I came close to. The next time, it wouldn't have only scared me, it would also save me. When I turned 20, I moved out of my parents' house, who lived in the capital of my country, to a small community in the south, and I have no intention of moving back. Sure, a little girl that grew up in the city is used to the endless variation of restaurants, bars, stores that never close, and a city that never sleeps, but I like it here. Despite the low population of the community and something of a sleepy town stamp on it, it's charming with its colorful wooden houses, the seaside campus, and the smell of butter from the old butter factory as an eternal reminder of where you are. I can practically go out whenever I want, wherever I want, and meet a total of 10 people, the neighborhood cats, and if I'm lucky, a cute but lost hedgehog. There's one more reason why I appreciate living in a small town. It is how incredibly safe I feel here. In the city, you can barely be outside alone as a woman after 10 p.m. without feeling such a discomfort that you feel compelled to check behind you once or twice every minute. All such discomfort, however, does only happen after a set time or during the darkest hour of the day. It can happen at any time, but that is something you learn. Something I had to learn. I was 17, and it was the summertime. I was spending most of the time at my then boyfriend's house, and he lived with his family about 20 minutes outside of the city. I lived with my parents at the time in the city, just along the green subway line, so if I wanted to get back home, I had to take the commuter train to the central station, walk across it, and switch to the green subway line, and ride a few minutes on there to get to my station. I was then in one of my rebellious periods, and had a month before I bleached my hair. I loved it at first, but after a while, my roots started to show, and I realized my mistake. My angel of my mother had got tired of my fuss over it and booked me a hairdresser so that I could have it back in the natural color, deep brown. The day of the appointment came, and I was as usual at my boyfriend's house, but I needed something from my parents' apartment first, so I put on my headphones and jumped on the commuter train. End of backstory. I switched as usual to the green line and sat near one of the doors that I knew would line up perfectly to where I would get off. I like to crowd watch when I travel, not to stare people out or anything like that, but just to look people and think about when they are going, what they do for work, or maybe make up a story about them. It was the kind of game that I often find myself playing on the subway. I played that game that day. I looked around at people, and when there was one station left until my stop, my eyes stuck to a man who was sitting a few feet in front of me. He was tall, perhaps in his mid-30s. His hair was dark and scruffy, wearing black clothes and big boots. He sat with his elbows leaning against his knees, crouching slightly down towards the subway floor. Today I don't remember what my fictional story of him was, but I know I saw him. The woman on the speakers shouted out my destination, and I stood up and went to the doors and got off. When I got out of the doors of my station, I saw that it started to rain, so I pulled my big hood over my headphones and started to quickly walk up to the apartment, which was only a few hundred feet from the station. The apartment was an old building with a large wooden door facing the street. The door has a glass pan that runs along the entire door, and when you enter the staircase, it is entirely made of marble, with an old wooden elevator with an iron door that you had to close manually. When I got to the door, I put in the entry code and pushed the door up. When the door was swung aside, something was reflected in the glass. I turned around and saw the man from the subway standing behind me. At first I was a little shocked that he was so close to me, but I assumed he was just one of my neighbors or a neighbor's friend. I also assumed that he stood so close to me because it rained and he didn't want to get wet. So I said hello and pressed the up button an extra time with my hip while I took my headphones off. He didn't answer me. I went to the lift and pressed the button, but I heard that it did not start. So I assumed that the neighbors had opened the door to park the elevator at the floor. I turned around and saw the man standing behind me, shaking. It was not a typical type of shaking that's common if you have a fever or a cold. It's more like a crazy twitching. He stood there jerking, with his head and his back as curved as they were on the subway, but this time, his eyes were not on the floor, they were on me. He opened his mouth to talk, but only some incoherent sounds came out, and then the shaking and jerking became more frantic. "What's your name?" he said at last. I remember my parents' words of wisdom to never tell your name to a stranger, especially one you feel threatened by. I wanted to tell him to go away, but I felt like I was frozen, and that provoking him would make the situation worse. I replied with a false name. He then asked, "Do you live here?" I lied and answered that I don't, that I'm just here to see a friend. I remembered thinking I was smart. Now he didn't know my name or where I lived, I thought, but it was now he started moving closer to me. I started backing up. He must have seen the fear in my eyes, but he continued, scuffing towards me. I heard the elevator engine start ticking and that it was on its way down. He told me he has been following me on the train, that he saw me there, and that he had to follow me. It was now that he lifted his head from his previous position, showing how tall he really was, and the shaking stopped. He spoke again. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." If I thought I was frozen before, that was an understatement. I was now pressed against the elevator door, and he was so close I could feel his scent. Some may think that these words still have to be somewhat flattering, but the way he said it, it sounded like a death sentence, like something bad for me at least. It was about when I heard the elevator stop on the first floor, and someone walked down the stairs to the courtroom door. That door is located on a small platform between the ground floor and the first floor stairs. You also know how you can recognize the sound of your parents' steps? I did with these steps that were coming down the stairs. I knew it was one of my parents, and when I listened in, they were my father's. I quickly thought that I would scream for him, but then I realized the man would know that I first lied, and he might get angry and do something to my old father. That was when my father opened the door to the courtroom, and the lightning struck the yard. The sound waves of cracking lightning pressed itself through the open door and made the whole marble stairwell scream. I screamed. The man screamed. I went to my usual position regarding thunder and lightning, fetal position on the floor. He, on the other hand, jumped backwards and started running out while shouting that we will be seeing each other again soon. I barely realized what happened. I went crying up in the elevator and into the apartment, where I told everything to my mother and my father. When he came up from the courtyard, we reported the incident to the police and went and dyed my hair, which made me feel a little safer as my appearance changed quite drastically. I was still scared after that incident, but also confused. I just kept thinking about what he was saying when he ran out. We will be seeing each other again soon. I absolutely did not want to see him again. However, I didn't get what I wanted. About a month passed, and I practically forgotten about the situation. I was on my way to Central Station to meet up with my boyfriend who was on the commuter train on his way to me. I stood and waited for him in the hallway between the commuter trains and the subway. In that particular hallway, a lot of people are walking either to the trains or from the trains. Very few people are standing still in it. As I said, I stood there, looked down the hallway from time to time to try to see if my boyfriend had come yet. When I see someone else standing still, there was someone standing on the other side of the crowd, and although everyone goes different directions and creates a kind of blurred effect on him, I see who it is. I freeze just like before. He stares at me, not like our first meeting, but as if he's trying to make up if I am who he thinks I am. Behind the new dark hair, Then my boyfriend comes from the crowd and hugs me, and I have to look away from the man for a few seconds to hug him back. I leaned my head against his shoulder and looked over it to see if the man was still there, but then he was gone. I've never seen him since. Has he seen me? I guess I'll never know. This story happened about 18 months ago. I lived alone when I was 19, and one night I decided to walk down to McDonald's like I do on occasion. I live about a mile from McDonald's. It was a bit of a sketchy area, a lot of people roaming the streets, a lot of drug addicts and criminals. I started walking and saw two guys, probably around my age, on the other side of the street. In this situation, it's important to note my house and McDonald's were on the same main street. I could feel their eyes as I walked past, but I didn't look up. They crossed the road and started walking behind me. They were close enough for me to hear them laughing and whistling. They waited at the corner as I went into McDonald's, and I could see them watching. I left the restaurant through the back door, walked straight up the side street, and around 3 blocks, before I braved going out to the main street again. I came out in front of them, and again they started following me. They began to start gaining on me. I walked as fast as I could, without running, because I knew then they would catch up to me. I came to a corner with a 7-Eleven, and turned in. As soon as I was out of their sight, I ran straight behind the store and hid between the dumpster and bush. I stayed there for maybe 20 to 25 minutes. I slowly emerged and went back to the side street. I followed that street down until I came to more shops behind the main street. The two guys were standing under a post light directly in my way. I froze and walked backwards, so slowly and carefully, trying not to be seen or heard. Again, I ran around another side street and ended up looping around my house, jumping my back fence. After that, plus a couple similar experiences, I have serious anxiety about leaving my house by myself now. This happened yesterday. Tuesdays through Thursdays are my long days at school, and I decided to get some Taco Bell for dinner. It's fairly close to my home, plus I'm just lazy. The Taco Bell near me is slow and often understaffed, but I usually don't mind. The line wasn't at all long when I pulled up, but it was slow. I sat in the drive-thru for about 14 minutes before I could order. I order and pull up a few feet, but I can't pull up anymore. The guy behind me motions me to move forward some more, so I shake my head and point at the car ahead of me. He yells that I can pull up more, and then I tell him I might crash into him if I do that. And then all of a sudden, he gets out of his car. He's yelling that I'm dumb, and as he reaches my front bumper, I'm closing my window and making sure my doors are locked. He then yells, 1, 2, freaking 3 feet you have to pull ahead. Move your effing car. I tell him, no, I'm not going to put my car butt against theirs. And he calls me some random slur I forgot. He storms back into his car. I crack my window back down at this point, and he yells, move your car or I'll move it for you. I don't care about my piece of crap car, and tabs my freaking bumper. I'm livid, scared, and low-key having a panic attack at this point. I yell, did you just tap my effing bumper? If you tapped my bumper, I'm calling the police and my insurance company. But this was a lie. My phone was dead, and it was in my bag. I'm panicking, and I was scared he had a knife or a gun. I don't even know why I even added in that I'd call my insurance. A worker, or maybe a manager, comes out, walks over to my car, looks at how much space I have, and tells the guy I can't pull forward anymore. He starts going off on her. He yells that he doesn't want their food anymore, and screams at the people behind him to move. Everyone reverses out of the drive-thru, so this jackass can pull out. He does so while yelling stuff I can't hear and flipping me off. The worker or manager goes back inside. I sit in the drive-thru for about 10 minutes waiting for the line to move while crying and shaking. When I got to the window worker told me that they were sorry and he wouldn't be allowed to come back. She asks me if I'm okay, and I fought to hold back more tears. It was really awkward. I paid for my food. They even gave me some free cinnamon twist, and then I drove home, still shaking. Apparently, bad things happen when I want fast food. I've been reading this stuff for a while, but never figured I'd have to post here. But something wild happened to my girlfriend and I at Burger King a couple weeks ago. It wasn't necessarily creepy, but definitely scary. Here it goes. We ordered some food, got our drinks, and sat down at a table near the corner of the restaurant. A minute after we order, a guy goes up to the counter and orders. He wasn't out of place, so I didn't notice anything about him for a few minutes. He sits down where you would typically wait while you wait for your order, and the first thing that got our attention was, as a kid, maybe 8 to 9 years old, ran right past him. He loudly says, "Atheist," to the kid in an accusing tone. He then was milling about talking to a radio-like box and how he needed to move to the North Pole. It was seconds after that I noticed he was staring at us. As I made brief eye contact with him several times to check that he was indeed staring, he then walked over and sat at the table next to my girlfriend and I. Great. He then starts babbling to some imaginary person saying, I don't know. Homeless and mentally ill are common in this area, especially this side of town, so we are on edge, but not surprised by this behavior. The lady working calls for order 179. The guy says, "They were before me," motioning to us, since he apparently forgot his number. The lady said 2 cheeseburgers, and he insisted that it is our food. By this time, I'm realizing what was happening, and I said, "Oh, yeah, we are 178. At this point, he snapped and totally lost it on me. "You Californians need to learn how to open your effing mouths," as he grabbed his food and began walking in my direction to the exit. I mustered up what fight or flight response I had in the moment to say, "Have a nice day, see ya," as he approached the door. And crazy guy continues to cuss at me, calling me names, etc. A few more words were exchanged, but I made sure to stay in my ground, but not say anything off color as he made his way out. As he left, apparently continued to scream at us through the window. All employees and customers in the place were looking at me in shock, and I was shocked too. The part that bothers me about this interaction is that the moment he walked past me, I saw in his eyes how removed from reality he was. Whether because of drugs or mental illness, or a combination of both, he was also much larger than me, so if he wanted to hurt me or my girlfriend, he likely could have. So crazy homeless guy at Burger King, let's please never meet again. It was the midsummer on a Sunday when I planned to meet one of my girlfriends in the city. This happened to me a year ago. I was 15 at the time, and I dressed in a pretty provoking manner. I wore the casual Latino, quote, gang style. No one really wanted to mess with me, especially since I'm a pretty big guy, 200 pounds, big, but not fat, 5'11", and I have a mean look, bulbed head, and a thin scar that reaches down the side of my face from a fight I got into before. I also have a few amateur self-inflicted tattoos down my forearms, and hands that are pretty meaningless, but more creepy and ugly. I also know how to fight. I've been in boxing ever since I was born. Anyways, back to the story. I took the bus to visit one of my girlfriends. I got to her house in the morning. At about 11, she complained that she texted me, but I had no messages from her. I left her house at about 6 and caught the late bus home. I thought I was home free until the driver told me the bus was out of service. The sun was beginning to go down. It was dark when the bus driver left. I pulled out my phone to call my mom. I had an unread message from my phone company saying my phone service was being disconnected because of a non-payment. Great. This is also probably why my friend's text didn't go through. Now, I'm stuck in the middle of the most poverty-stricken countries with no way to contact my parents or even get a ride home. I was in front of a movie theater and a mall. A few people loitering at the bus stop rushed to me and asked if I was selling dope. Really, wasn't surprised about that. I walked away and was spooked by a homeless lady throwing bottles and screaming at the top of her lungs for no apparent reason. I ran a block away looking for a payphone, a way to call my parents, when I reached a McDonald's, where I was planning on calling my parents with their free Wi-Fi. My phone died when I got there. I paid for a drink and sat down. I was so helpless. I looked around to see if I could ask someone to use their phone to call my parents. There was a man sitting at a table over, and he was alone. So I approached him and asked him if I could use his phone, and he said yes. I frantically dialed my house phone. My mom answered and said she was on her way to pick me up. This man told me to sit with him, to calm down, and eat a burger with him, which he already ordered. When I went to refill my cup, I glanced over and saw him putting something into my burger and placed it on my side. I sat back down with him and told him I wasn't hungry. He said alright and placed it on the tray, not touching it again. He was an old man. He had glasses and was pretty fit for his age, and he was missing his pinky and index finger on his right hand, which made him eat fries really abnormally. He ate really fast, as if someone was going to take his food away if he didn't, swallowing it without even chewing. He was probably 50 years old. He told me he was Siberian, working for a government project. He said he gets lots of money and that he has a white Mercedes-Benz outside. He offered me a ride home, where I declined and told him my mother was already coming. It gave me a creepy smirk, which ran chills down my spine and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was about to flip out. I wanted to beat the crap out of him. I was furious. Why was he doing this to me? I thought this only happened in movies. I'm a big guy. No one should be messing with me. Look at my tattoos. Look at my appearance. You shouldn't mess with me. I heard my mom's voice as the front door opened, and I felt calm. I got up and waved goodbye. My mom and I were at a red light when I noticed a white Mercedes-Benz roll up right by my mom's car. This isn't a usual car to see in this poverty-stricken area, so I was pretty sure it was the man. I thought he was going a different direction, but once my mom got on the freeway, I knew he was following us. Each lane we crossed, he did. The exit we got out of, he did. I didn't want to alarm my mom, so I asked her if she can stop at the store so I could buy some chips. We pulled into a parking lot. As I saw the man drive off, noticing the shine of light off his glasses, I knew I wasn't being paranoid. When my mom drove me home, I didn't notice any car trailing us. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed the Mercedes-Benz pass by. How in the hell? I was freaking out as I noticed the shine of light off his glasses. Now, he knew where I lived. I didn't want to tell my parents anything. I was sure I was going to give my dad a heart attack. He wasn't in the best conditions at the time. My mother was already stressing about it, and my brothers were too young to understand anything. I had a gun underneath my mattress that I used to feel tough, but I needed it now more than ever. I was the black sheep in the family, so I was usually left home alone. I heard my blue-nosed pit bull barking in the front lawn. I looked outside the window and noticed the man passing by, trying to secretly take pictures of my house. I saw his car pass by my house a few minutes later. This happened the next day, and then it happened a few more times, and then it stopped. Though, when I was with my homeboys after school a month after, I noticed the Mercedes parked on the opposite side of the road from where I usually exit school. It was after detention, so pretty much no one was around. I knew it was him because I could see the shine of light on his glasses. I told my friends, since there was about 8 of us. My friends joked before they told them about this guy, saying I'm crazy and they'd beat his ass if they see him. My friends immediately ran over to the car and one of them pulls out a gun from his backpack. I was frozen with adrenaline and fear. I knew he was bluffing because the gun is never loaded. It's just for show, or was it? I debate that to the day. Keep in mind, after this, it's a secret between us. No cops can be involved. I can't call the cops on him anymore. What am I gonna say? We pulled a gun on him. We threatened to kill him. We can't even prove that he's been stalking me. Besides, it's my word against this old man, who is rumored to work for the government. I also have a police and mental health record, so I was definitely unreliable, and I was going back to the loony bin, or back to juvenile, if cops find out. I was scared as hell, but at the same time, my heart started pumping faster and faster. It was a mixture of adrenaline and fear, because I don't want to go back to loony bin, or back to juvie. Creepy rich stalker that I met at McDonald's, let's never meet again, for your own safety and mine. This happened 2 weeks ago. I was with my mom at McDonald's after getting out of school, waiting for my dad to drive us home in our car. We were eating, and this man looked like he was in his 30s, and he came up to us and asked us for money. He looked like a homeless, but his eyes looked like he was on drugs. My mom gave him $2, and he had a homeless looking friend and gave him the money. 10 minutes later, he came back asking us for more money, and he said he needed $10. That's when me and my mom got very nervous. My mom said, "No, I don't have any more money." And he went back with his other homeless looking friend, whispered something in his ear, and looked at us. That's when I lost it. I told my mom, "Let's get out of here. What if they plan on robbing us?" My mom agreed, and as we were walking out the door, they saw us and followed. Luckily, my dad had just arrived, and as soon as they saw my dad, they went back inside of McDonald's. I was very nervous, and I hadn't gone there since, because a lot of other homeless people and mentally ill go there a lot. This is a popular story with my family and most of my friends. Amanda is my brother's girlfriend. At the time of the story, she was looking for her first apartment and moving out of her parents' house. Her and my brother didn't want to move in together since they had only dated for a few months. She opted instead to search for a roommate on Craigslist. While browsing, she found an ad titled something like "Roommate Wanted, Females Only." This sort of thing was common, since the area she was looking in was mostly young professionals. The listing was for a room in a house for about $225 a month, which was quite cheap compared to most places listed. The occupant listed herself as a 23-year-old female college student that wasn't comfortable with living with any males. The other roommate would have their own room and a attached bathroom. So far, Amanda was into this place. However, the listing only had a single photo from the outside of the property. Amanda sent an email waiting to meet the occupant and tour the house. Within 30 minutes, she receives an email back and it has all the details and the time to stop by. The girl who had the house worked late hours and wanted Amanda to stop by 8 p.m. When Amanda arrives, there's a handwritten note on the front door saying, "Door broken, use back door." Walking around the house, it looks nice, but slightly unkept. There was tall grass, weeds, dusty windows, etc. Still no alarms for Amanda though. She goes to the back, and when she knocks on the door, an old man opens the door. At first, Amanda thinks she has the wrong house, but the man reassures her and says that the occupant, I forgot the name, was out, and he was the landlord. The occupant asked him to meet Amanda since she was working late. He seemed pleasant and offered to show her around. Alarms start going off, but they aren't red yet. First, the guy was clearly in his 40s, unshaven, and had looked like he was living in his car. Also, only the kitchen light was on as he walked around the house. Amanda noticed one really big red flag too. No furniture or anything. The landlord was polite about answering questions, but seemed slightly worried about keeping lights on for too long. He would rush her around and only let her look at the rooms for a few moments. There was a single room that the landlord wouldn't open, telling her that it was the occupant's room and he didn't want to invade her privacy. As they walk down the hallway into the living room, she notices the front door has a plank nailed across it. Amanda's creepometer is starting to ding, so she decides to wrap it up and leave, but trying to be polite as well. She's telling the guy thank you for showing her around and stuff like that, but then he perks up and states that he forgot to show her the basement. It's recently furnished and would be a great rec room, and then he says she should take a look down there. At the time, Amanda and the landlord were standing in the small hallway between the front living room and the back kitchen, and this little hallway was the basement door. When he opens the door, it opens outward to create something of a barrier between Amanda and the back door. The basement is pitch black. He smiles, motions down the stairs, and says, "Ladies first." What happens next is nothing more than a stroke of luck. Amanda gets a text as some random person parks in the front of the house. Thinking on her feet, she pretends it's a phone call and answers her phone. "Hey, yeah, are you here? I'll come out from around back and let you in. It's great, you have to see it." With a motion of confidence, She excuses herself around the landlord and walks out the back door, and the guy just looks at her very confused. Once outside, she sprinted to her car and sped like hell out of there. When Amanda got home, she told her mom and my brother everything that just happened. Cops were called. They took her statement and went to investigate. The Craigslist post had been removed. Epilogue. The house had been foreclosed over 6 months earlier, and the property had been abandoned. When the police investigated, they found that the closed room the landlord didn't want her to look in was where the man had been staying. There was a pile of dirty blankets, rotten food, and empty gallon jugs everywhere. More creepy was the basement. The man had tied a thin piece of fishing twine at about shin level across the stairs, about halfway down. The basement was empty except for one pile of old blankets, a broom handle wrapped in leather belts, and a few rolls of tape. Amanda ended up not moving in there. My boyfriend wrote his version of this story a month ago, but I wrote my perspective for a comment in another subreddit and thought it would be fitting here. A few weeks ago, I had to fly out to a small town I'd never been to in order to look for a place to live. I'm moving there in the fall to start my grad school. My boyfriend flew in with me, and before the trip, I researched all sorts of apartments on Craigslist and set up a bunch of appointments. Our first appointment was in the afternoon in this sort of remote residential area. The landlord sounded fine over email and asked me to call him an hour before the appointment to confirm I was coming. I called. He didn't answer, so my boyfriend and I started walking up to the house and just hoped he would show up. Maybe 10 minutes before the appointment, he called me. "Are you coming?" he asked. He sounded like an older man and had this very strange, slow way of talking, but I just thought he was older. "Yes, we're in the front of the house right now." He got extremely upset. "We?" "Oh, yes, my boyfriend's with me." "You never told me you had a boyfriend. You never said that." It had never crossed my mind to have to tell him this information, since my boyfriend would not be coming to live with me. He was just helping me look for apartments on the trip. Anyways, I told that to the man, and after a very long pause, he said, sorry, it's just sometimes people don't tell me they're married, and it surprises me. I'll see you soon." And then he hung up. I told my boyfriend about what the man had said, and he was immediately weirded out too. He wanted to leave, but there were slim pickings in terms of real estate at this point, so I stupidly said that we had to stay in case this place was the place. As we're discussing it, we see a man leave the house, the same house we're going to view. This man was young and extremely sketchy looking, greasy hair, dirty clothes, etc. He took one look at us and ran out of the house to his car and pulled away from the curb with a screech. Okay, so now we're really weirded out, but this isn't enough for us to bail just yet. And as we look at each other wondering what to do, the landlord arrives. He's in his 50s, very tall and very strong looking. His eyes are completely blank and empty of warmth and emotion. He slowly walks up to us and says, "I'd shake your hands, but mine are dirty." "What from?" my boyfriend asks. "Work," the man says in return. He asks us a lot of questions about me, completely ignoring my boyfriend. The entire time, he stares into my eyes without blinking. What am I going to school for? What other places am I considering for a living? Is my boyfriend moving to this town too? I try to give answers that are vague as possible. Meanwhile, my boyfriend asks the landlord questions of the same kind, which he refuses to answer. Then he says, "Let me show you the basement." At this point, I should have noped out of there, but I didn't. I kept thinking it was an weird old man from a small town. We're city folk, by the way, and that we were just feeling paranoid. My boyfriend, on the other hand, wanted out of there, but he followed us as the man led us to the back of the house, away from the street, to this sort of detached shed. He opened the door, and we saw that there were stairs leading into utter darkness. He flipped the switch at the top of the stairs, and the light didn't come on. Normally, the response for this is, "Oh crap, lights out," or something like that, but he just said, and slowly walked down into the darkness. Then, he stood there, without moving, in the dark, and said, "Aren't you coming down?" "There's nothing to see if the lights are out," says my boyfriend. The landlord just stands there for a long time, then slowly walks up the stairs and closes the basement door without saying anything. He took us into the house. Weird and increasingly creepy things ensue. The front door, the only exit to the house, locked automatically, and when my boyfriend tried to fiddle with it, the man got really upset and told him to leave it alone. He managed to open it secretly though. The man kept trying to box us into small rooms and, according to my boyfriend, kept reaching his hands into his pockets, only to take them away when he caught us looking. On Craigslist and in person, the man claimed that there was a grad student already living in the house, but the evidence of that seemed false. There were neat piles of generic textbooks on the table, but not anything a 20-something-year-old might read. There was a bowl of fruit on the table, but no other fruit in the fridge or pantry, or utensils, nor silverware. There was maybe 3 t-shirts in the closet. The supposed grad student wasn't out of town, but the landlord couldn't say what school he went to or how long he'd been renting the house. Finally, the man had showed us every single room in the house but one. This one he refused to open, claiming it was just the attic, and we didn't need to see anything up there. He gave us several reasons when we inquired. It was unfinished, there was furniture up there, it would smell bad. This last one I believed, because standing there near the door, it smelled terrible. Finally, we made our excuses and bolted out of there. The man walked us out, pretending to go to his car and leave, and when he thought we had turned the corner, slowly went back into the house we saw. My boyfriend, fixated on the idea that there was something wrong with the guy, Googled the guy that night. We found 3 things: that he was a pillar of the community, known by a lot of townspeople, that there was no evidence of him owning or managing a real estate company, as he claimed on Craigslist, and that he listed his home address as the very house we had been touring, the house where the, quote, grad student lived. Update. After talking to my boyfriend, I decided to contact Craigslist and the police department with my info. The police say they'll drop by for a check-in, and I'm still waiting on a reply from Craigslist, but at least the ad is flagged and should hopefully be taken down soon. Thank you everyone for your words. Second update. Hey everybody, sorry it's been a few days, but I've been on vacation with my family and I haven't heard anything from the police until now. They sent me a message saying the information you provided has been reviewed and an investigation is in progress. I'll be scanning the papers and hoping they tell me about the results of the investigation, though it's highly unlikely. Third update. Hi all. So the police, I guess, got back to me about what happened when they went to the landlord's house. It is still creepy, and what happened afterwards might have been even more creepier. So for the past several weeks, I've been waiting to hear back from the police department. Yesterday, my curiosity got the better of me, and I asked them if anything had ever come up of the investigation that they said was, quote, in progress. I left a message, and they got back to me today. From what I understand, the police used my information to perform a wellness check on the grad student who the landlord claimed lived in the house. The landlord came to the door and told them that the grad student had moved out already, and I think the guy gave the police a new address that the guy who was a grad student was living under, but I'm not entirely sure what went down because the officer was being very vague with me. Anyway, I guess the officer running the wellness check, a woman, still asked to look inside the home because it was a protocol to make sure the grad student wasn't actually in there, in need of aid or something. The landlord was very resistant, but had to let them inside. The police looked around and didn't find any evidence of the grad student being there, but she agreed with me that the landlord's behavior was just off. When I asked her about the attic and the basement, she paused and seemed hesitant to tell me anything. She said the landlord eventually let them look into the rooms to make sure the grad student wasn't in there. I asked her if she found anything. I think if there's anything in plain view, the police can arrest someone during a warrantless wellness check, and she again hesitated and eventually admitted that they couldn't find anything criminal. but there definitely was a strange smell in the attic, along with some carpet bags. At least, that's what she told me. I guess they weren't allowed to open those to find out what was really in them. What really chilled me was she said she went into the basement while her partner waited at the top of the stairs, and she actually fell down the stairs because half the steps were broken up and strangely ragged, with some of them missing, but there was still nothing down there, nor any sign of the grad student, so the police left. This officer seemed new or young, but really dedicated to her job. I'm not entirely convinced she knows what she's doing, only because of the way she's talking. It was just a very youngish, not authoritative way of speaking, I guess, but she was really kind and sympathetic towards me when I first came forward with my information. When I asked if that was the end of it, she told me she was trying. I don't really know what that means. I get the feeling that there's not much she can do legally, though I'm not sure, as she didn't say so herself. She said that the investigation is still, quote, in progress, and then she asked if I was comfortable ever coming to the station to talk to her in person once I moved to that town. So that's that, for now at least. I'm not really sure where any of this is going, if that's the end of it, or if that's just the most the police can do, or even if this police officer is really going to do anything to pursue it and uncover anything. I really don't know. In some ways, I feel helpless and confused, and in others, I'm not sure if I'm relieved that they didn't find dead bodies, and if I want that to be the end of it, I don't know. Also, this could be and probably is unrelated, but I received an email from an unknown sender today. All it said was it you? Creepy. There was a link in the email that I foolishly clicked on, but my computer's antivirus software caught a virus from it and neutralized it, as well as destroyed the infected email. I ran more scans on my computer to make sure it was clean, and was only after that I wondered if the email wasn't just the typical spam, but a message from the landlord himself. I'm probably just being paranoid, but that's the update for anyone who's interested. Maybe there will be more to come in the future, although I certainly hope not. Thanks for sticking with me this far, Reddit. I feel good in knowing someone is on my side. You all have inspired me to be the kind of person who does something instead of standing back and hoping that there's nothing wrong. This happened last year, around this season. While I was broke and struggling to make ends meet, I had just moved out, and I didn't want to resort to going back to my parents. Anyways, I was so desperate, I was looking on Craigslist for caregiver/housekeeping type gigs, just to make quick cash while I looked for my FT position. After responding to several, I got a bite back from a man who had advertised as a disabled man who needed help with his morning and evening routines since he had a bad back. As a past caregiver, I thought nothing of his request to help with bathing and dressing, since I knew it could be difficult for some. After chatting on the phone and coming to the conclusion that he was nice and normal, I proceeded to head over to his townhouse late one night to help him with his nighttime routine. He lived a bit out of the way from me, but I was desperate and I didn't mind. He even said I could spend the night since he'd need me for the morning anyways. Once I got there, he was decent looking and was in his 30s or early 40s with a cane. He paid me $200 up front for the expected nighttime and morning routine the next day. He explained he was ex-military and had back surgery recently. Things started to get weird once he offered me some drinks and commented how cute he thought I was. I should have seen that as a big red flag. But again, I was super poor, but I didn't want to cheat him, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He led me to his bedroom where he got undressed for his evening shower. After quickly giving him the most untouching shower in the most platonic way I could, he got out and said he was heading off to bed, but didn't want to wear any clothes. The guest bedroom where I was to stay was right next to us, and though I was tired, I was still pretty on edge. My gut instinct was telling me to get the hell out of there. The issue was that we were on a 3-story townhouse, and we were on the top floor, and he had installed baby gates on each floor so his cat doesn't run away. Also, he turned off all the lights on the lower floors so it was pitch black. In order for me to get out, I'd have to pass his room. I quietly arranged my stuff in my purse while I heard his TV blaring, and to my horror, I saw him walk swiftly to his bathroom without his cane. I realized he was not as disabled as he told me, since he had previously put on an act as if he couldn't walk without it. As quickly and quietly as I could, I fled and ran like hell out of that room while he was in the bathroom and jumped like an Olympic sprinter over the cat gates down the dark stairs. As I threw the front door open to run to my car, I heard his house alarm go off. I got in my car as fast as lightning, heart beating like crazy. I immediately got phone calls from his number, and every car that trailed me had me terrified until I got out of there. Finally, after a 2-hour drive, I was back to my place and grateful I was out of there. Who knows what could have happened if I had stayed overnight, but I didn't want to stay to find out. Please forgive me for the bad grammar and punctuation. I'm not a writer, nor do I understand the formatting on this thing. I'm a long-time lurker, and I've never posted a personal story on here before, but let's get this over with. I'm a 28-year-old male, but when this happened, I was about 23. I worked at a mom and pop's pizza shop in North California. It's a small farm town and has a few suburbs near it. I kind of did everything since I knew the family and they trusted me running things while they were gone. This night though, I was working deliveries and got the weirdest one of my life. Everything seemed fine when I took the order. The lady ordered anchovies on her pizza, and I always think people who order that are weird as hell. She made a point to tell me the pizza had to be hot when it got there, or she wouldn't pay for it. So I get the pizza and throw it in the warmer and drive to her house before any of my other deliveries. I'd like to tell you guys that her house was creepy and run down, but it looked like your average 1-story new housing development home. I rang the doorbell and put my fake-ass customer service smile. You all know what I'm talking about. As soon as she opens the door, I knew this was going to be bad. The old lady looked like she was a smoker of 50 years, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "It better be hot or I'm not paying like I told you over the damn phone." I understand, ma'am. I made sure to stop by your place first, even though it was the last on my list. Bring it in and set it on my table, she said. Now, I normally didn't go inside customers' homes because I read way too many stories on r/no-sleep and r/let's not meet, but at this point, I'm just wanting to kill her with kindness and see where this will go. So I say, no problem. I also brought cheese and ranch if you need it. As soon as I opened the bag, she grabbed the box, and her hand was on the bottom of it, and then she started rubbing it. It's not hot enough. You dumbasses do this every time, and I'm not paying for this crap. Not a single dime. One thing I have an issue with is my mouth. I don't know when to just shut up and try to understand where people are coming from. Look, lady, your house is a 5-minute drive from our shop, and I stopped by your place first. There's no way that your pizza is cold. If you refuse to pay, you're going to be 86ed. She immediately walked into her kitchen and came back out. She had an old pizza from a few weeks prior. She had ordered from us and threw it at me. Take your effing pizza and get the hell out of my house. You're the devil. She yelled that at me and kept calling me Satan and the devil. Again, my mouth has no filter and I can't control it. I try, but I fail every time. As I'm closing the bag and laughing about how much I hate my job, I tell her, "Alright, ma'am, you will not be able to order pizzas from us again. I hope you have a great day. God bless you and your house." She kept following me outside to my car and screamed, "You're the devil," over and over again. And there's families outside just watching this go down. So I get into my car and start driving. Once I'm back, I tell my manager what happened, and she told me that the lady already called in and screamed to her what just happened. Her story was that I cussed her out and got her order wrong. My manager shut her down and said I'd never do anything like that, but here's the weird part. She whispered into the phone to my manager and repeated, "Send him back, send him back, send him back." She called once a day for almost 3 months, just whispering this to whoever answered. She started driving by my restaurant and yelling, "The devil works here, you're all going to hell." Now, I wasn't scared, I was just pissed and wanted to retaliate because I can't tell you how many times she tried to follow me back to my apartment when I got off work. One night, I pulled over and got out just for her to stop her car in the road with her lights on, yelling, "The devil is here." After this, I jumped back in my car and sped off. Luckily, after 6 months of dealing with this lady, I find out she's a schizophrenic and has bipolar depression and hadn't been on her meds. Her daughter put her in a care home, but when she was clearing out her house, she saw her mom had pictures of me all over her bedroom with one word on it. Yep, you guessed it, devil, written all over it. She found me and explained everything to me, and that was the end of it all. When I was 20 years old, so 6 years ago, I worked as a delivery girl for a pretty popular pizzeria in my area. Initially, I worked the late morning to mid-afternoon shift, but when the guy who delivered for the night shift ended up getting fired due to him losing his license because of a DUI, I was placed on the night shift since my boss hired a family friend who could only work my shift for whatever reason. I really didn't want this shift because you never know if people who order late at night actually want pizza or if they have other intentions in mind. Unfortunately, my boss was an asshole and essentially told me if I wasn't willing to work the night shift, I was going to be fired. I wasn't exactly in a position where I could be out of work, so I reluctantly worked the shift. The first month of the shift went by without any issues, until I had to deliver a pizza to a house that just barely made it out of our delivery radius. I punched it into my GPS, and the house was located in a pretty suburban part of the city. I arrived, and it's about 11 p.m. The block was extremely quiet, decently lit, and mostly littered with modern townhouses, but the house I delivered to was a duplex. I ring the doorbell and wait for about 30 seconds. No answer. I ring it again and wait another 30 seconds. Still no answer. I'm standing there getting really nervous, worried if something bad is about to go down, but thankfully, a man opens the door. He looked like he was in his late 40s. He was pretty tall, maybe like a little over 6 foot, and he was very skinny. I tell him his pizza is here, and he just stands there staring at me. I asked him if he was okay, and he responded by saying, "Yeah, I'm fine, sorry. I got off work not too long ago, and I'm zoning out a bit." He hands me the money, I hand him the pizza, and as I'm making the change, he says, "You're really beautiful, you know that?" Not really thinking too much into it, I thanked him for the compliment and gave him his change. I said goodnight, and he did too. I walked back to my car and finished my deliveries for the night. A few days later, I get a delivery order from the same place. I head over there around the same time as I did last time and ring the doorbell. He answers the door excitedly and said, "Hey, it's you again. How are you?" I told him I was tired and can't wait to go home, which he chuckled and said, "I know that feeling pretty well," as he was pulling out his wallet. As he's counting his money, he asked me what my name is. Being kinda tired at this point and not really thinking straight, I stupidly tell him my real name. As I'm making change again, he asks me for my number and then says, "I'd love to hang out with someone as glorious as you are." Whoa, buddy, pump the brakes. I've literally only met this guy like twice to deliver pizza. I had no idea who this guy was. I'm positive he barely knew who I was as well. Another thing to mention is that I looked way younger than I was at the time. I was told by numerous people I still looked like I was 15, and I was hoping he thought differently, and he wasn't hitting on what he thought was a teenager. I'm just staying there awkwardly for a few seconds before I muster out, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." He gets upset and says, "Okay, I see. We stand there in silence before I tell him to have a good night and walk back to my car. He says nothing and still stands at the doorway staring at me until he finally went back inside once I started my car. I got a pretty creepy vibe from this guy and even brought it up to my coworker, and they agreed. They also thought he was being pretty creepy. Everybody agreed except for my boss, who overheard everything and claimed I was making up stories and trying to gain sympathy for having to take the night shift. He was a freaking asshole. A week later, as I'm working the night shift, we get an order from the same guy again. This is when it really hits the fan. I arrive at the house around 10:30 p.m. and keep in mind that from my perspective on the road, it didn't look like a single light in that house was on. I get out of my car and I walk to the front door with a pizza box in my arms. As I am approaching the door quickly swings open to reveal the man, except this time he's wearing a suit and I jumped back. He laughs and said, "Sorry if I scared you. I saw you out the window and figured I'd open the door now so that you wouldn't have to ring the doorbell." I was getting scared because, as I mentioned before, there was no lights on in the house, so he was just sitting in the dark this whole time. And if so, why? I nervously laugh and say it's okay. He asks me if I liked his suit, to which I said yes. He then asks me, "Would you like to go on a date with me tonight?" What the hell? I told him once again, I do have a boyfriend, to which he chuckles, gets close to me and says, "Honey, there's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship. If you go on a date with me, I'll show you how a real man treats a girl." He grabs the pizza box from me and throws it to the side and grabs me by my arms super hard. I'm officially crapping bricks at this point and trying not to cry from the fear that was overwhelming me. I start pleading with him, "Dude, please, I just want to go home. I don't want to go on a date tonight." He just stares at me with the most sinister look I've ever seen on someone's face and says, "I don't care, get inside, now. We're going to have a good time." He starts trying to pull me into his house, and I'm trying to resist as hard as I can. After a bit of struggling, he lets go of one of my arms and starts grabbing something out of his pocket, which I presume is a knife. I did something that to this day I'm still very thankful worked. As he was doing that, I used my free arm to punch him as hard as I could in his stomach. That stuns him for a few seconds, and as he loosens his grip on me, allowing me to break free, I quickly run to my car, and as I get in, he runs at me and tries pulling me out of the car, holding the knife in the other arm, and yells, "Why are you making this so goddamn difficult?" I grab a half-empty soda bottle I had in the cup holder and throw it at him. Luckily, it hits his head, and he lets go. I slam the door, and then all of a sudden, he jumps right on the hood of my car and starts scratching and banging at the windshield with his knife. I put the car in reverse and quickly back out of my spot and quickly reverse down the road with him desperately trying to hold on. He's banging on my hood screen. "Stop the effing car!" I turn onto the next road as swiftly as possible, and luckily, he falls off the hood of my car. I slammed the gas as hard as I could to get as far away from this sick bastard as I could. In my panic state, I drove a couple of blocks down the street and kept making turn after turn onto side blocks as I feared I was being followed. Eventually, I reached the red light and I slammed on the brakes and just sat at the intersection, frozen from what had just happened. I began crying and violently shaking as I was sitting there. It dawned on me that I came so close to losing my life, and I couldn't help but feel like I shouldn't have been alive at that moment. Once the light turned green, I pulled over to the side and just sat there crying. Eventually, I get the energy to drive back to the pizzeria, and almost immediately after I walk in, my coworker knew something was wrong after seeing me. I practically broke down in front of him, and everyone else came to the front wondering what was going on. I felt my tears and explained everything that had just happened. My coworker comforted me, and my boss was surprised and began to apologize profusely for what had happened and for putting me on the night shift. He took me into the office and handed me the phone to call the cops. They arrived at the store, and I gave them my statement, as well as taking pictures of any marks of myself, as well as scratches on my car from the encounter. They could all be used as evidence. My coworker followed behind me as I drove home and collapsed onto my bed, and strangely enough, I managed to fall asleep. I quit my job the next day, and luckily, a friend of mine managed to hook me up with a new job at her clothing store. As far as the psycho goes, 2 days later, I received an update from the police. The entire duplex was owned by the guy's brother, who lived on the right side with his wife, and the psycho lived on the left side of the duplex. I learned that he had been in and out of jail consistently, at first for robberies and assaults, but later on, it was a lot much more worse crimes. He had also been released from jail 5 months before this encounter. When they arrived at my house, he was long gone, and his family had no idea where he ran off to, but the police insisted they would find him, and indeed they did, albeit not alive. I spent the next 2 months in fear that he would find me and finish what he had in mind, but the police contacted me and updated me into the chase. Apparently, he fled to another city and attempted to kidnap a teenager walking alone at night on the street. Luckily, someone happened to be looking out the window at the right time, called the cops, and the police caught him trying to force her into his car. He manages to flee, and the police chases after him. He blew a red light near a busy boulevard, and a van slammed right into the driver's side of his car. By some sort of miracle, the driver of the van only sustained minor injuries, while the psycho succumbed to his wounds long before the ambulance could arrive. I thanked the officers for everything they did, and for informing me, and I walked out of the station. I don't wish death on people, but after hearing about his death, I felt relieved. I felt relieved that he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. I was relieved that I never had to encounter him ever again, and that I wouldn't have to go through with charging him and reliving what happened that night. My last experience 2 years before this was scary, but I think this one takes the cake as being the scariest, as I was alone and face to face with this psycho. Who knows where I'd be if he managed to pull me into his house. This happened back when I was 17 and living in a small rural village. I'd been at a friend's house all evening watching movies and chilling. I left to go home around 11 p.m. It was quite a long walk back to my house. She lived on the outskirts of the village, down some back roads. I felt relatively safe as it got to a certain time of night that it was pretty quiet. You wouldn't bump into anyone, and there would be hardly any cars on the roads, especially at the late hour that it was at the time. It was weirdly peaceful. Where I lived, there was a large avenue with 2 big blocks of houses, like 2 big circles that you would get to after following a small dark road that consisted of a few large old houses. As I'm passing one of the houses, I see this little beat-up red Nissan coming towards me. The closer it gets, the more it slows down, and the guy is nearly breaking his neck trying to look at me. I mean, there was nothing subtle about it. It nearly came to a full stop as it drew alongside me, and I started to panic. There was not another soul about, just me and this strange guy. I was determined not to get myself in a tiz, so I picked up the pace and refused to look at him. As far as I know, he just drove off. I continued walking home, which was literally a 5-minute straight line from where I was, and kept listening out for a car engine and any headlights creeping up behind me. I heard nothing and saw nothing, so I breathed a sigh of relief as I could now see my house. I walked in and locked the door and saw my mom stood in the living room chatting on the phone. I'm trying to interrupt her conversation, telling her about the weird guy in the red car, when, for some reason, she goes to the front window and peeks through the curtain, and she takes the phone from her ear and says, "What is that car?" This is all in a minute since walking through the door, and I'm thinking to myself, it can't be him, because if he had followed me, I would have heard the car. Before I even got a chance to look for myself, there was a knock on the front door. I go and answer it, only pulling it open a few inches, and there was a guy stood there empty-handed, wearing like a basketball cap. It was the same guy in the car. I'm just like, what the hell? I say, "Can I help you?" And then he replies, "Did you order a pizza?" He asked me And I'm like, no, I think you have the wrong house. Taking a step towards me, he says again in a not messing around kind tone. No, I said, did you order a pizza? Before I reply, my mom has come up behind us, opened the door fully, and says, is there a problem? This causes him to back up, mumbling, I must have the wrong address, before he gets in his car and takes off. Sure to say, we were both a bit spooked, and made sure everywhere was locked up properly. So, to the stealthy pizza guy who stalked me on my way home, let's not meet again. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was really nice. It was a 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to the campus, so it was an ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in with her. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell something was a little off about her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off. Thanks, I mean, I look nothing like him, so it just didn't make any sense to me. We got back home. She asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in photos of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all of his movies. I didn't even know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night, she'd been saying I look like him, and now it's obvious to me she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had a creepy, high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I would wonder what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would walk out and talk to me for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything and would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised, and then I'd say, "Hello, Beth," and then there would be this long awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard something that sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom, and all the lights were off, but I could see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker, Max Barker, Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it doesn't help that she kind of looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night, I was watching Gladiator, and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I said sure, and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes later, into her story, she was so riled up, she was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his effing throat!" That was a big game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening and started doing her weird giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act like a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She might have been drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives were on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think of was her saying she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I'd enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved, she contacted me. I was at the movies, and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received 40 plus text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything to, "Hi, how are you?" to, "I effing hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It always freaks me out. So for a little bit of backstory, the story isn't all that long. I was living with my ex-boyfriend at the time, and a family friend that I've known since I was in diapers. Our roommate, Stokes, had an old friend that had fallen on hard times, and we all agreed he could stay with us for a bit while he got back on his feet and then found a place, etc. At first, everything went fine. This was in the end of 2008 and first part of 2009. My roommate's friend, Jay, seemed a little crazy, but harmless. He was a self-proclaimed Mew Thy Master, and it seems like he knew what he was talking about and claimed to have spent a couple years in the military. I didn't know the guy other than what he told me, and Stokes had told me. Stokes had known him for quite a while before we let him in to stay with us. I never felt right about being in the same room with him alone. However, I basically disregarded it as me being 18 years old and paranoid of everything around me due to past encounters with people. My boyfriend at the time, Dan, told me I had nothing to worry about and that people like Jay just liked messing with people. Jay probably lived with us for about 6 months. He did nothing to help maintain the house, and since I was the only one with a stable job, I was basically supporting 3 grown men and myself on a movie theater paycheck. Stokes had help from the state, but I bought her tobacco, as well as anything he couldn't get on food stamps. As the months were on, we started noticing things going missing around the house. Mind you, we didn't have much, but we did have a few things of value. Stokes was involved in computer building / repair on the side to try to make as much money as he could. We all decided it was time for Jay to leave, as the problems didn't start until he arrived, so we kicked him out. We weren't mean or rude, nor did we voice our suspicions. We just wanted to wash our hands of him and be done with it. Jay leaves, says he understands, and doesn't try to argue or put up a fight. All is well and blissfully peaceful for the next few nights after Jay leaves, so we think nothing about it and are just happy he's gone. One night, my boyfriend and I got done doing something and then went to bed. Now, I guess I should probably give a description of us. I'm a 5'4" female, 120 pounds. My ex is 6'4" and 135 pounds. I didn't know he was a meth head behind my back, and I was naive enough to believe him when he said he wasn't. He was also 12 years older than me. My roommate Stokes was 6'7", 534 pounds at the time. Jay, 5'7", probably around 145 pounds or so. Anyways, so then, all of a sudden, I'm woken up by a strange noise, and I open my eyes to see Jay sitting on the edge of our bed, by mine and Dan's heads. Our bed is against the wall, and to the right of the door when you walk in. Our heads by the door. Jay had a lighter under his chin and said, "Rise and shine." I won't forget it. I was super scared at this point. I was a tiny 18-year-old woken up by a psychopath in the middle of the night in my pajamas in my own home. He started telling Dan and I all of these terrible things he was going to do to me, like tie me up and torture me. Dan started talking to him, trying to talk him down, and eventually we ended up giving him some small amount of alcohol we had. He wanted cash, but we didn't have any. All in all, it could have been a lot worse, and thinking about it now, almost 10 years later, I really think he was just trying to scare us, but that sure is a messed up way of doing it. I'll never forget that face, or the feelings he invoked in me of being scared, vulnerable, and helpless. Since then, I left my ex-boyfriend, become a great shot with weapons, found an amazing man, and moved on with my life. Leaving my ex was the best decision of my life. He was very mentally ill, and I've no doubt, had I stayed with him, my life would be so much different now, and nowhere near as successful. Jay, let's never meet again. I've been having problems with my dorm roommate since the beginning of the semester. She didn't shower or wash her clothes regularly, left dry top ramen noodles all over the floor for me to step on, didn't wash her hands or flush the toilet, sighed in a way that sounded weird consistently, showered with the door open, and got water everywhere, and so many more things that I hated. Basically, every single pet peeve I had been born with was in this girl. At first, I blamed it on her not understanding American etiquette. She's foreign and from China, but then things started to get creepy. When I went home for the weekend, a few weeks into the semester, I gave her a heads up that I would be gone. She did that weird sigh again and looked sad and betrayed, like I was doing something wrong by leaving her. She said something along the lines of, "Why are you leaving me? I don't like sleeping in my room by myself. I feel more comfortable when you are here." Mind you, I only met this chick on move-in day and only said a few words to her. I should have known to keep my guard up after that. Every once in a while, she would stare off into space, usually for like a half hour. Sometimes, I would catch her watching me study out of the corner of my eye. After a long day of studying in a library, I went to the patio in our dorm for some ice from the machine and found her with her head on a table with her eyes wide open, staring at something in the distance. I think she scared off the guy I liked because he stopped coming around to see me once he found out she was my roommate. After she creeped me out so much, I started staying away from my dorm, only going there to sleep and grab things I needed. She seemed like a nice person, but I couldn't live with her anymore. I emailed my RD that I wanted a room change. I told her I wasn't comfortable living in my dorm anymore with this girl. I was greeted by two solemn-looking campus police officers and the RD of my building. They calmly asked me where my roommate was, but I had no idea. I told them her usual lurking spots and went back to what I was doing. I knew something was off. I asked them what was up, and they just ignored my question and asked where she might have been. The police officers at my campus are usually pretty pleasant looking too, since there isn't a lot of crime in my campus, and they don't really have much to do. 30 minutes later, I hear banging at my door again. I'm greeted by my roommate, who has tears streaming down her face. She rushes past me into her bed, and then plops down on it. She starts wailing, screaming, and eventually hyperventilating. I thought maybe someone close to her had died. I was feeling sorry that I asked for a room change during the time that she probably needed somebody with her the most. I could only make out a few bits and pieces of what she was saying to the RD. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I promise I won't do it again." The police officer pulled me aside and quietly asked me if there is anything in this room she can hurt herself with. I gestured towards her drawer, where I know I've seen a small knife in it. He went through the drawer, but didn't find anything. Suddenly, she was right behind him screaming, "Don't you dare go through my things. We don't want you to harm yourself. Please calm down. You think I'm gonna harm my roommate? I wouldn't do that. She's just silly." What the hell? I'm not gonna hurt anyone. I just want to be left alone. By then, the RD dragged me out of the room and told me what was going on. She got into a big fight with her best friend, and I didn't even think she had any best friends, or any friends at all, and started sending her threatening emails, and even threatened to kill herself. By this time, I was in complete shock. I just saw someone completely lose it right in front of me. She told me that she had received my room change request and was going to meet with me tomorrow. I told her I would stay with a friend that night. After my roommate calmed down a bit, I went into the room with two RDs talking to her quietly to pack a night bag. She apologized for acting crazy, and I half-heartedly accepted, grabbed my crap, and got out of there. I was waiting in my dorm common area for my friend to get there when I realized I forgot my blanket. I went inside thinking that someone was going to be in the room keeping an eye over her, but she was alone. She glared at me as I walked past her to grab my blanket. There was pure hatred in her eyes. "Where are you going?" I never heard her use this tone of voice with anyone before. She was livid. "I'm gonna stay with my friend for the night." And then she said, "Why? Because of me?" I swear I saw smoke rising from the top of her head, and a vein in her forehead was about to burst. "Sleepover!" in the happiest tone I could muster. I got out of there and nearly ran to my friend's dorm. I talked to the RD, and there were no more rooms open in my housing complex, and if I wanted to move to another complex, my parents would have to pay an extra $1,000. They are furious and want me to move immediately because the police officer was incompetent. He jeopardized my safety by asking me that question in front of her. They don't want to pay for me to change rooms because it was my university's fault for putting me in this awkward position. I'm just afraid that she's gonna take this out on me. I don't think I can return to my old dorm. She looked like she was out for blood when I went in there last night. Update: I'd completely moved out of my room yesterday and into a new dorm, and my roommates here are really awesome so far. My old roommate has been going to counseling. As for paying the money for my new dorm, I haven't heard anything from my parents yet. I think they don't want me to worry about it. I had a few encounters with my old roommate, but nothing bad. Thanks for listening to my story. Okay, so I've never posted on here before, but I always read, and I love to comment on people's stories. Unfortunately, I quite recently had a very scary, more like terrifying encounter. For some background information, I live in a small apartment complex right outside my campus with some friends. I'm also 20 and a girl, so all my friends were bashing me for never meeting with any boys or going out. I gotten sick of it. I didn't want to be the little friend who stayed home and ate pizza while my friends were out on dates with boys, so I decided to sign up for Plenty of Fish. Now, I'm not the type of person who would say yes to any random stranger. They had to be nice looking, they had to have plenty of photos of themselves, and we had to be interested in two of the same things. So, with those rules in my head, I signed myself up to join the world of online dating. Within a few days, I already had two boys I was talking to. One said he was a doctor, kind of hard to believe because he was 20, and one said he was a construction guy, easier to believe. I didn't like that the doctor guy was lying to me, but one day, I was getting crap from my roommates. The construction guy, who we will call Dan, messaged me on a messaging app, and he asked me if I wanted to go out for a bite with him. I told my roommates where I was going and who I was with. You know, all the things someone should do, so someone knows if you've been abducted or not. I even had a check-in time, so that when my roommate texted me if things were good, I had to say some silly code word that meant things were good. If I responded another code word, it meant, help me get out of this, and if I didn't use the code words, then she would call the police for help. So I quickly dolled myself up and got ready for my first date. I put my hair up in a classy bun, leaving strips of it hanging around my glasses. I put on a nice white blouse and some black pants, and I was ready to go. I jumped in my car and headed out to the restaurant where Dan had chosen. It was just out of my town, but it was still only a 15-minute drive from my apartment. I arrived at the restaurant and saw him almost immediately. He was wearing a nice suit and looked like how he did in all his photos. He was waiting outside the restaurant doors for me. His eyes lit up when they saw me. He walked over to me and smiled. We chatted a little bit outside, since it was summer and not cold. Then we walked inside. We ate dinner and talked about our life, and things like how school was going. I got the text from my friend, but since everything was going all good, I sent the code word back for good. Dan talked about how much he liked his job and things, and altogether, it was pretty nice. Except for one thing, Dan was boring. He didn't do anything exciting or really talk enthusiastically about anything, and it was just boring. It was an average date, and I honestly didn't care to go on anymore. The next day, I woke up to the feeling of my phone vibrating nonstop. I look at it and realized it was vibrating so much that it had fallen off my dresser. I almost laughed. Then I saw the messages were from Dan. At first, they were all saying how much fun he had and that he would really like to go out again. But then the messages took a turn. They got violent and angry that I wasn't responding. It was 7 in the freaking morning. I was sleeping. I noped out of that situation. I texted him back and said I'd been sleeping and that no, I was not going on any more dates with him. I was just about to block his profile on both sites when I get a final message. "Watch your back," was all it read. At first, I was really creeped out, but then I thought that since I had him blocked and all my accounts were deleted, he could do nothing wrong. Later that day, I saw a text from a random number telling me how pretty I looked in my blue PJs. I glanced outside just in time to see none other than Dan running down my road. "How the hell did you get my number?" I thought weirdly. I blocked that number and continued what I was doing. Later that night, I fell asleep pretty early and woke up to my phone text alert going crazy. It was from the number that I just blocked earlier that day. There were dozens of messages saying how I was going to get it. I quickly showed all my roommates the messages. They all told me that I should go to the police, but since I was a stupid person at the time, I didn't. I blocked the number again and went back to sleep. Once again, I woke up to my phone buzzing. I didn't wait. I jumped in my car and drove all the way down the street to the police station. Once there, they told me that they could do nothing to help me and just told me to block the number. I did. At least I had it on record. Nothing happened for a few days. The number stayed blocked on my phone for a while, but then the pictures started. There were pictures of my house, of me in my house, my car, my work. I went back to the police and finally, they were able to get a restraining order against Dan. I never received any messages from Dan again after that. I now never use dating websites. So Dan, I hope we never meet again. If anyone has any tips on staying safer, please let me know. Hello again. I've posted a few times on here about some of my many creepy experiences, which I've received some positive feedback on, so I thought I'd share another. So back in 2014, I was 21. I was in an off and on again toxic relationship and was trying to get over him and move on, so I thought I'd give dating sites a crack. I tried a few, met a few guys, some decent that never went anywhere, and some that had serious issues. I hadn't dated since high school, as I'd been in 2 long-term relationships fairly close together with people that I had known for a while. As I'm sure you can imagine, I was clueless. I wasn't used to guys trying to trick me into meeting up or leading me on, or even how dating really worked. How many days after the date do I have to wait to text him, etc. After a few failed attempts to find someone, I thought I'd broaden my horizons and really try to find someone serious. At this time, I was talking to a couple of guys. The one that stood out was a really nice, if not slightly simple guy who I had a lot in common with. His name was Ben. I didn't want to put my eggs in one basket, so I started talking to another guy that I wasn't really into, physically or mentally, but he was smart and funny. So I thought I'd see how things played out, seeing as most of the guys that I picked based on gut feelings turn out to be terrible. This man who I nicknamed Guy, can't remember why, but it was a running joke between us, was very, very persistent and very cocky, which I wasn't really into, but he seemed like a cool guy on the other hand. He was very knowledgeable, quick-witted, and easy to talk to. We spoke on the phone a few times, and it was a reasonably good experience. But there was something about him I just didn't really like. As I mentioned previously, he was quite cocky, and used to do little annoying things, like hang up without saying goodbye, and had an overall pushy demeanor. One day, when I was on the phone with him, I brought it up and told him I believed that it was all a front and he wasn't that arrogant and he was a lot nicer than he let on. He told me he had an ex-girlfriend who broke up with him because he was too much of a pushover, so he decided that women liked guys that were on the arrogant side. I told him I didn't like that at all, and I spoke to him because I felt there was something more than that to his personality. I also picked up on the little things in his profile, such as not liking, quote, fat chicks and other things. I'm a bigger girl, so I asked him if that was a problem, to which he responded that it wasn't. He had just written that to make himself look better. I accepted his excuse and hoped for the best. I decided I needed to try different kinds of men if I wanted to find someone, so I gave the guy a chance. He often suggested meeting at his place over pizza and movies, which I wasn't comfortable with yet, so I suggested he comes to a club with a few friends, which he declined and tried to convince me to come back to his place, which I wasn't really keen on. After he clicked on that I wasn't coming to his house in the middle of the night, he suggested we go out for coffee. As I didn't drive, he suggested that he'd pick me up, which I didn't really like or think was a good idea, but agreed on it at the end of the day. At around 8, he picked me up, and we exchanged pleasantries, and once we were seated, I was genuinely surprised by his attentiveness and how much interest he displayed, asking me many questions about myself. Still, something didn't sit right. It wasn't that I didn't like him. There's just something that made me feel uncomfortable. All went well. We chatted about this and that, until the questioning took a strange turn. Have you ever kissed someone just because you simply felt like it, not because you, loved them? He asked, rather loudly, considering we were in a crowded cafe. I was taken aback and embarrassed, and hesitated before stuttering. No, not really. I think that's more of a male thing. I can't say I've done that. No. I know it sounds sexist, but shut up, I was under pressure. He then asked me a few more innocent questions, before switching the topic back, asking a lot of inappropriate questions, and personal questions, and other oddly worded questions that I can't remember right now. I lightly told him that it was rude to ask me that, but still was tolerant of him. Not long after this, he suggested we leave. By this, I thought he meant part ways, as he knew I had to meet up with a friend not long after coffee. I was wrong. We went to the counter and he offered to pay, which I declined. Luckily, he did, because, ironically, I had left my wallet at home. I felt like it was such a cliche moment, but felt super guilty as it makes me feel bad when anyone pays for me. When we got in the car, he started to drive a different direction to where I lived, which was 5 minutes away. I asked where we were going, and he pulled up in a street nearby with little to no street lights that was extremely dim and parked outside a random house. I asked him what we were doing there, and he told me he wanted to talk in private, which I responded that we could talk in private when we get to my house. He argued that it wouldn't be private, and that people would look out of windows. I stupidly told him that no one would because only my sister was home, and I would text her not to. He kicked up a bit and got slightly angry before agreeing to take me home. This should have been enough for me to realize what was going on, but no, I was naive and lonely. When we parked out the front of my house, we started talking, and he leaned in and tried to kiss me, which I kept pulling away and giving off negative body language, but still was friendly. After a bit, he started asking me to look at him, to which I made jokes about. Sometimes in stressful situations, I make jokes to clear the tension. Yeah, I know, bad habit. I kept my distance until he basically turned my head and started kissing me. I just went with it. I was lonely and thought he wasn't that bad looking, and I reasoned that a kiss was just a kiss. After a few seconds, I tried to pull away, but he pulled me into a bear hug, which I half-heartedly tried to get out of, but gave up and continued kissing him. A while later, I tried to pull away, and he put me in an almost headlock type hold. Still, somehow I wasn't concerned enough to get the hell out of there. We stopped kissing after a bit and continued talking. He asked if I'd sit in the back seat with him to cuddle, to which I hesitantly said yes. Once we got in the back, we cuddled and started talking, but then he kept grabbing at me, kinda playfully. I just kept telling him to stop because it was pissing me off. He was doing it in a jokingly way like, "Whoops, accidentally brushed you." I didn't take it too seriously until it happened a few times, and I told him that he had his feels and enough was enough. I wasn't good at saying no to men back then. Not that that's an excuse or anything. After a couple of times, I said I was moving to the other side of the car so he couldn't touch me. I sat there and we continued talking when all of a sudden he reached out and pulled me in for a cuddle. He was playing with my hair when all of a sudden he tried kissing me and making out with me again, hair wrapped in his hands. I was confused and tried to push my body back up when he roughly pushed me back to him again. I didn't know what to do. The guy was around 6'2" and 120 kilograms, but I managed to get myself out of his grip and get out the car. As I was getting out, he yelled out to come back, that he didn't do anything. "You know what you freaking did. Thanks for the freaking coffee," I said as I slammed the door in his face. I walked quickly but quietly to my front door, even though I was petrified, as I didn't want him to have the satisfaction of seeing me running. He continued yelling out that he had done nothing wrong the whole time. I banged on my front door and my younger sister opened it to see me in tears. I told her what happened and eventually settled down. I swiftly blocked him on Facebook and vowed to never talk to him again. I kid you not, 3 days later at work, I receive a text message from him. "Hey, you want to get coffee tonight?" Me, no. Him, why reply then? After an hour of no response. Him, "I see what you did there," with a smiling emoji. Me, "I'm just curious why you would even bother asking." Him, "'Cause I think you're cute." I'm curious why you're answering me. Me, sends a picture that reads, "You smell like hidden motives. Stay away from me." Him, "Pretty sure my motives were fine the other night." I never made contact with him again, and I blocked his number. A few years on, I was telling someone about him and decided to unblock him on Facebook to show her, when I noticed that I now had a mutual friend. The mutual friend was a girl I had been extremely close with in high school, who confessed to me something terrible. I won't disclose it. I was the only one she had ever told that to, and I helped her find the courage to put the piece of crap away, so I naturally messaged her. I told her the whole story, and she was stunned. She told me that he worked with her and now lectured something to do with justice at a local university, which was laughable. She told me that he had harassed her for months about going on a date with him and would occasionally get quite nasty. And all the time she knew him, she felt uncomfortable around him even when he was nice. He chopped and changed quite regularly, apparently. He felt kinda intimidated most times. He would guilt, pressure, and have a go at her about this, quote, date or not, messaging him back, etc. Very full on, almost stalkerish. She ended up getting a boyfriend, and he was furious, but she didn't hear from him after that. Judging by our time frames, she met him around 6 to 3 months after I did. I'm sure I've left some minor details out, as it's a bit blurry, and my dad died after the event. So if I remember anything else, I will add it. Thanks for reading. I've had so many creepy situations in my life that this sub brought me out of lurking. Female. At the time of the story, 16 years young, and every ounce of naive that 16 can handle, so around 2003-ish. I started chatting up a dude on some forum because his username had the likes of an song lyric I liked in it. I swooned. He added me on MSN, and we continued to talk for quite some time. I lied about my age, stupid I know, saying I was 18. He was also 18. Skip forward a couple of months. We had some phone conversations, and he seemed like a relatively awesome dude, and I wanted everything to do with him. Turns out, he only lived a 2-hour drive from me, so the logical thing to do was tell my address, and for him to come pick me up. Stupid, again, I know. First date was extremely awkward, bowling and soda pop. I could tell he was interested, but just didn't know how to communicate with no computer in between us. I gave it a second shot after our phone conversations continued, and he expressed some frustration that he had such a terrible first date and had first date jitters. My school was hosting a battle of the bands, so I figured it would be a more social setting for us to communicate at. The guy picks me up from my house and literally showers me with gifts. A expensive Incubus sweatshirt, a birthstone ring, some small origami hearts, all in a wooden box that he had made handmade, along with some flowers. I was taken aback, but thought it was super sweet. Just much for a second date, especially after the first one was so awkward. We're at the concert, and he starts talking to some of my friends. There's a band I wanted to see, so I walk away from the table we're sitting at. The band finishes, and I turn around and he's gone. I looked for him and asked around, and he decided to give my friend a ride home without letting me know. And he had no intentions of returning for me, so I grab a ride with my neighbors. Needless to say, I was upset and decided the relationship was a no-go. I broke it off over the phone. Stupid again. He continuously emailed me for the next couple of days. He didn't know what he was doing and feared he made the biggest mistake of his life. He started sending me stuff. At first, it was letters, then gifts, more flowers, CDs of him singing, and other stuff. Then lockets of hair and other weird things. At this point, I should have told my parents, but I was afraid of getting in trouble for lying about my age or meeting someone off the internet. I mostly ignored these things, occasionally asking him to stop. My sister, who was 17 at the time, approached me one night when we were home alone and asked me about the guy who added her to MSN and was gushing about how in love me and him was. I was sitting near her and told her just to ignore him. She thought it was funny and urged him on. She told him to come over and she would help us work it out. I was devastated. I explained everything that happened and she started freaking out. We locked up and shut off all the lights, went downstairs and called my parents. My father came home and walked outside. When the guy pulled in, he immediately turned around and left. No word from him for about a week. One day, my sister's on the computer on MSN and says, "Oh crap, you need to look at this." And I see his username and that my sister had downloaded a file from him. It was a video of him carving my name into his chest. At the end, he looks at the camera dead on and says, "This is my final goodbye." I never heard from him again. Checked newspapers from his area for suicides because I was freaked out. Years later, I found him on Facebook. I stalked his pictures a little bit. You can still see my name scratched into his chest. First post. Hopefully things are formatted right as I am posting from my phone. So, I used to be a CNA at a hospital in Missouri. Our general job is to take vitals at specified times, document input/output, and then just help the patients with whatever they need. But occasionally, we have to be a, let's just say, babysitter for someone, which usually means this person is being crazy or on suicide watch and needs to have someone with them at all times. Being a youngish and relatively average-looking female, I had my fair share of creepy/weird hospital patient stories. I've been bitten, kicked, groped, etc., but this particular story is probably the moment that actually made me realize that people can be terrifying creatures and all that. More background. The hospital I worked at was hit by a tornado in May of 2011, and sometime after, our behavioral health facility was relocated to a much more seduced area, very close to the border of Missouri and Kansas, through only a few miles from town. I'm talking, you could see all the stars outside and hear the coyotes in the distance. It seriously felt like the scene of a potential horror movie during my smoke breaks outside there. I worked overnight, and though I usually work cardiac, I was called over to behavioral health to be a sitter. I was a little creeped out. I remember thinking about what we would even do if the power went out and stuff, which actually did happen later, but I wasn't there. No one escaped, but all the doors were auto-unlocked. I get to work upon receiving a report on the patient. The daytime tech tells me this. I honestly don't know why he needs a sitter. He's so nice and polite. He calls me ma'am and held the door for me and stuff. He did sort of get in a fight with another patient, so that's why he has to have a sitter. But the other patient started it, and he isn't even here anymore. You're gonna have an easy night, girl. So I sit next to the guy and try to relax. I honestly wasn't that worried about being in the men's area because generally the women's ward was much more known for causing trouble and violent outbursts and stuff like that. Also, in Missouri, most patients are just bipolar or schizophrenic and off their meds or drug addicts, and people who admit themselves because they can afford the help they need. And the guy really was super nice. He was totally polite and asked about my tattoos and enthusiastically showed me the bear he had tattooed to his arm and stuff like that. As time passed, the night continued to be relatively uneventful, and as bedtime around 9 p.m. came, the guy got in bed and went to sleep. In his room, I situated myself on the floor in the corner near an outlet so I could read my Kindle with my back against the wall. Keep in mind here that while I had worked at the hospital for a while, I had only worked in behavioral health one other time and never really got the specific kind of training that the psych techs get, like how you're always supposed to walk behind everyone so your back is to no one and such safety measures along those lines. We did have alarm buttons that clipped onto our scrubs, but they were apparently pretty flimsy because when I took lunch at 3 a.m., I noticed mine on the floor, slightly under the patient's bed. The guy slept fairly well until around 1 a.m. Around that time, he started to wake up and just sat in his bed, staring at me. I didn't want to appear nervous, and I wasn't really allowed to leave his room anyway, so I would just say hi, tell him the time, and suggest that he still had some time to sleep before breakfast. He had such a weird blank expression on his face, and he would stare and then ask if he could call his parents because he had some things he needed to discuss with them. I would just reiterate the time and tell him he could call them in the morning. Around 3 a.m., I took my lunch with the nurse who was assigned to my patient. While we were eating, she told me she couldn't believe I was brave enough to sit in his room, all things considered. I asked him what she was talking about and said he only needed a sitter for fighting the other dude, and I wasn't really worried. That's when the nurse proceeded to tell me that the man was admitted because he kept threatening to murder his parents, that incidents kept escalating from him making telephone call threats to bringing a gun to dinner with them, until finally they brought him in when he started leaving corpses of violently slaughtered animals on his parents' doorstep. She told me that when they went into his trailer, there were a bunch of gutted and dead animals in his home, and there was blood and feces smeared all over the walls. So I don't know if the daytime girl didn't know all that, but I definitely had myself cornered in this guy's room. By the way, I'm 5'4", and I was in the spot literally furthest from the door, with an alarm button that had fallen off, with the guy showing so many serial killer symptoms. And I was only told he needed extra care because another patient had started a fight with him. This is my first post here, and I'm still extremely shaken up from this encounter, so please be kind. I'm not sure if this story is creepy enough for this sub. If not, please let me know, and I'll be happy to remove it. I'm currently a patient at a hospital to receive antibiotics for a cystic fibrosis exacerbation. I'm 17, female, and a freshman in college. My mobility assistance service dog and 70-pound black male golden doodle is staying with me. Before I go to bed each night around midnight or 12:30, I take him outside to use the bathroom and sniff around a bit. The area that I take him to is off the side of the hospital, with a small patch of grass and a tobacco-free seating area. It is mildly lit, but typically empty. You have to walk down a ramp and across the side of the hospital to reach it. I am on 24/7 medicine and fluids, so I'm always attached to an IV pole. When I leave the floor, I'm required to wear a bright green pass that has my room number on it. Tuesday night, my friend was with me as I gave Hamilton, my service dog, his little bathroom/snack sniff break. A man in a bomber jacket and blue jeans was sitting in the area, smoking. He seemed to be watching us intently, but I was with both my large dog and my friend, so I wasn't too concerned. Wednesday night, I went out earlier than usual and didn't see him. Last night, however, he was there again. As soon as I arrived to the area, he made a phone call in a hushed tone. Minutes later, another man showed up. They sat together and were both watching me intently for a few moments until a young woman walked through the area. I was getting relatively nervous, so I used that as my chance to leave. Both men stood up as I started to leave and followed me up the ramp. At the top of the ramp, a security car was parked nearby and a couple of security guards were standing there talking. I am assuming the men either turned around or went into the parking garage at that point, because I didn't see them enter the hospital, and the only other exit off the ramp is the parking garage. Tonight, I went outside again, later than usual. The man wasn't at the bottom of the ramp in the area that I go to, so I thought I was in the clear. I let Hamilton have his bathroom and sniff break before walking back up the ramp. As soon as I stepped off, I hear somebody 15 feet behind me. It was the same man in the bomber jacket coming from the parking garage. He was carrying something small and narrow. I believe it could have been a knife. No one was in the vicinity, so I sped up. Every time I looked back, he immediately made eye contact. If I sped up, so did he. At one point, my IV pole got stuck on a part of the sidewalk, so I had to stop and lift it. The man picked up his pace, almost jogging now. My dog heard this and turned around. I'm sure Hamilton knew I didn't want that guy anywhere near me. He didn't growl, bark, or anything. Service dogs cannot act aggressive, but stood there and stared intensely at the man while I lifted my IV pole. The man ducked behind a pillar for 10 seconds as I told my dog to leave it, and we made our way as quickly as we could to the hospital doors. However, I didn't want the man to follow me to my room, so I stopped right outside the doors to the actual hospital. From where I was standing, I was directly in the path of the information desk in a well-lit area. I figured this would be my best shot. The man stopped behind me and waited for about a minute. The girl working at the information desk looked up at us, and the man turned around and walked into the hospital. He walked past me, maintaining eye contact through the glass as he passed, turning his head to do so. I finally entered the hospital, and he was walking very slowly down the hallway, constantly turning back to look at me and stopping every few steps. Luckily, the lobby was relatively busy, and the unit that I'm on is locked. I was able to get into the elevator and shut the door before he could get into the elevator unit with me. I spoke to my nurse and will change the time and location that I go outside. However, he may know my room number because I'm required to wear the pass as mentioned before, and I am very nervous that he will somehow sneak into my unit. Hello everyone, long-time lurker and first-time poster here. The other day, I was reading some of your stories to my boyfriend and commenting how lucky I was that I hadn't experienced anything like it. And he reminded me of that. Oh wait, yes, I have. And it's super creepy. A little backstory. A few years ago, I got my tonsils removed. And I should mention that I am well into my 30s. I thought it would be a fairly simple recovery, given that every time I'd ever heard about something getting their tonsils out, that someone was a child. Blending what I heard from my television, my friends, and the internet, it seemed like it would be a breeze. I just live on ice cream and mashed potatoes, lots of Netflix, and sleep. Spoiler alert, it was not a breeze. I found myself in the emergency room at 3 in the morning, 7 days after my surgery, with blood in my throat and the worst pain I could ever imagine. It was a really bad night, made just a little bit worse with the fact that I was alone. I was being really tough about it though. After I'd been admitted to a room, I tried to make myself comfortable and turn on the TV. The room was fairly large for an ER room. I searched through the channels and found something I wanted to watch, probably HGTV to be honest. and decided to text my boss to let him know I probably wouldn't be in the next day. I dug for my phone in my purse, found it, and when I looked up, I realized there was a man in my room. I knew immediately that this man was not in his right mind. He was youngish looking, wearing a dirty t-shirt and khaki shorts, and stared at me, unblinking. "Hi, can I help you?" I asked. The man continued staring at me and said nothing. "I don't think you're supposed to be here," I said, trying to be polite. He said nothing, but began advancing towards my bed slowly. My heart was racing. I was thinking, leave it to me to be murdered in the emergency room. I don't remember what I said next, only it was some version of, "You're not supposed to be here, please leave," but he kept advancing. He was steps away from my bed when 3 cops rushed into my room. The 3 of them put their hands in front of them defensively, but used very polite and soothing tones. They said things like, "Wrong room, buddy," and "Let's go this way," but they never touched him. Somehow, they were able to coax him out of the door and down the hall, closing the door behind them. It was surreal. I almost could have thought I imagined the whole thing, except a few minutes later, the doctor came in to see me and immediately addressed and apologized for my surprise visitor. "Yeah, we have off his meds situation," he said, as though that explained everything. Being in a hospital is truly where we are most vulnerable, and I hadn't until then realized how completely mashed together and exposed we can be. Nothing happened, but it totally could have in those minutes we were alone together. Anyway, I live to see another day, but guy in the hospital, yeah, let's not meet again. So this happened about a year ago, and to this day, I still remember it clear as day. So the night had just began, and my friends and I were all sitting around at my parents' house, kicking back by the fire, having a few beers, and just chilling. Well, the next thing you know, I see flashing lights and a sheriff walking up with some EMTs. A little background for the rest of the story. My mom's had multiple suicide attempts since her teens. The worst that had happened was when my mom overdosed. Thankfully, she made it and is doing better than ever now. So my buddy Sam offers me to drive my sister and I to the hospital. This is where things start to take a turn for the weird. So we get to the hospital, and Sam, my sister, and I have been waiting there for over 3 hours, and we haven't ate at all. So I offer to buy everyone some food. So Sam and I head out to McDonald's to go get some food. Well on our way out to the parking lot, this black guy comes out of nowhere and says his car won't start. So we offer to jump him, and he declines. This is when our warning sign should have started going off. He says he works for the hospital, and then changes it around and says he works for the hospital I work at, and saying we're merging. Now I knew he was full of crap. My hospital was the top in the state, and something was off. I thought maybe he's just having a bad day, like I was, so Sam and I decided to talk to him for a bit. He then proceeds to ask if we could drop him off at his cousin's, as it is right next to McDonald's. So we said sure, no problem. We should have known better. So I hop in shotgun, and Sam hops in the driver's seat, and our guest proceeds to ask both of us if we could give him about $80. This was the first thing that really set my alarm bells off. We both made up excuses that we're both broke and that we'd still drop him off at his cousin's, no problem. Well, then he changes the destination to his friend's house. This really set me on edge, and Sam shot me a text saying he was freaked out. Sam never freaks out, and usually has a weapon of some sort in his car, thank God. So I started thinking of how the hell I can get this guy out of my car without possibly setting him off. I remember the giant hunting knife Sam always has in his car. I always used to think about it. I thought it was ridiculous. So I asked Sam pretty bluntly, "Is your big ass hunting knife still in your glove box?" Now the moment I mentioned the knife and took it out of the glove box, our guest decides he wants to go to his apartment that is conveniently 2 minutes away. So Sam and I drop our guest off, and thank God he ran off. It still scares me to think about what he had planned for both of us if I hadn't mentioned the knife and brought it out. So hospital parking lot stranger, let's not meet again. I'm a female in my mid-20s and work at a local hospital. This happened last week when I finished my shift in the evening around 8 p.m. It was still light outside, and I decided to walk the 20 minutes home. Whenever I'm walking, I tend to listen to music on my iPod, or just zoom out. I know, not the safest idea, but most of us do it. A few minutes into the walk, I have to cross a bridge over the motorway. As you walk out the slope to get to the bridge, there's a small wooded area on either side of you. I could feel something or someone around me, so I casually stopped my music and had a look around me. Nothing was out of place, and I thought maybe it was me being overly sensitive. I kept the music off, just in case, and carried on walking. A few seconds later, I heard rustling behind me and turned around, startled again. Nothing was there. At this point, my heart is racing, but I'm trying to convince myself I'm being paranoid. I get to the top of the bridge and am now in the open and can see all around, so I am feeling a lot better. 10 minutes later, and I'm nearing home, and I'm laughing to myself about how silly and paranoid I was. At this point, I'm as relaxed as can be, and my music is back on, and I'm just enjoying winding down from work. I've now reached the top of the park, which sits opposite to my road, and am all perked up as I'm nearly home. I look behind me. I hadn't heard anything or really sensed anything to my knowledge, but I'm thankful I did look and saw a guy about 3 feet behind me. He was that close. This guy was tall, skinny, and had greasy black hair that hung around his face. He was dressed in all black. The creepiest part was, he looked dead behind his eyes. He was staring directly at me, and there was nothing there, just blankness. I turned back around and started walking quicker down the park, hoping that I was just being silly. I contemplated rummaging in my bag for my phone to call the police, but I didn't want to slow myself down, and still at this point wondered if I was misreading the situation. The creeper carried on following me, and although wasn't as close as 3 feet anymore, it still significantly kept up speed. Every time I looked behind me, he was staring directly at me, still no emotion. Still completely dead behind the eyes. I contemplated heading somewhere else and trying to lose him, but at this point, I was terrified and just wanted to get to the safety of my own house. As my house came into view, I decided just to run for it, which I shouldn't have done sooner. As I looked behind me, I noticed the creeper wasn't running after me, but he was still walking fast and staring at me. I got to my door and rummaged through my bag for my keys, completely aware that any moment now the creeper could have caught up. I grabbed them and hurried into my house. When he was 15 feet away, I slammed and locked the door behind me and then ran up the stairs. The front door glass panels and our living room area has big glass doors facing the back garden. I didn't want him to be able to see me. I was shaking like crazy as I edged up the stairs and looked out of our stairs window. He was nowhere to be seen. I went upstairs and looked out of the bedroom window and got a better view of the front garden. I couldn't see him. Thought he left. With my heart still racing, I got my phone out of my bag and headed downstairs to call the non-emergency number. As I walked into my living room, his face was pressed up against the glass, peering into my house, and we made eye contact. Dead eyes again. I let out a quiet scream and ran back upstairs. I called the emergency number as I waited for the police. The creeper had taken a seat in my garden, cross-legged, just staring at my house. The police came within 10 minutes and picked him up. He went to them without any struggle. The policewoman that came told me he told them I was waiting for her. Turns out the creeper is a patient in the psychiatric ward of my hospital I work at. From what I found out, since he'd had a bit of a fascination with me from seeing me around the hospital doing my job, some people I know in the psychiatry unit tell me he'd been mentioning me as his girlfriend recently, and they all thought it was another patient. They now think he was talking about me. He's moved on to another hospital now, somewhere where he can recover, and I won't be afraid to go to work anymore. And I'm hoping he doesn't have the freedom to just leave whenever he wants, especially if he's planning on creeping on hospital staff. I do hope he gets better, but I'm finding it hard to have warm wishes for him when he terrified me as much as he did. I'll definitely be catching the bus from now on. Hey guys, it's me. I just wanted to mention right before the video ended, I hope you like my new mic I got. I don't know if it sounds better or worse than the last one I had. Can you guys please tell me? Also, I have a subreddit now where you can upload your stories. And the more stories I get, the more frequent uploads I can upload. So yeah, if you have the time, please give me one of your stories and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.